So that we don't have any misdeals like hot mics someplace when we say that Brandy is a problem child.
This is as loud as it goes right here.
Yes.
Mics are hot, so watch what you're saying.
Is he on?
He's got his number here. What am I doing wrong?
Yeah. And I think it's, maybe Twitter, I mean, just social media. I actually like it. See, people don't have to get drug out here.
Say hello.
Are you related to know he hasn't said hello?
I think it's good.
Mr. Tolley?
Because when you read it, it doesn't necessarily
Hello?
come across with the tone and inflection of,
Yeah.
you know,
Mr.
what
Tolley?
really happened in the meeting. So I think it's,
Hello? Can we hang up and call him back? And call back? Okay. Because did you try the phone call before that it worked? Did you always go to Kurt to come out with it? Is that set up by Dave? If not,
I think it's Twitter. It's Facebook, I know it for sure.
well, let's just, if you can hang that up, let's.
That's my Facebook and Twitter, pretty much my world.
Get up every morning.
That's okay, we agree on a lot, but it really
Would you like some lunch, sweetie?
important. Sure. I also have that.
Combination of steroid and something to help heal it. Yeah. So she got it a week ago, and this is the second and final shot. Yes, she's already got it today.
You need the plate for me
It's a cocktail. I don't know all the ingredients in it, but it's some kind of steroid with some medication.
Jack,
for
you want some
healing.
water?
No, thank you.
All right.
Hello?
I like your shoes. Who are you running from?
Mr. Tolley?
I tore that IT bill, so I can't.
Weird.
Like my dress shoes, it might
Can you hear us?
aggravates it, so I tore it Sunday. So, fat and out of shape, and it didn't working out for me.
Yeah, it's working.
Ooh, we're late. Debbie, are you ready? Are you two ready?
We're trying to get a hold of someone. Do you want to try to, sorry about that, do you want to try to call him back, or it's the phone's
did.
working? Yeah, it's
And it
not.
wouldn't.
Ask him to call you, to dial this number.
Well, he did. And it didn't
And
give
you
me
never heard him, because you can hear my phone, that's what I don't understand. See, it's working, it's just not, I don't know if he's not talking out of his phone, or. So what do we do?
Okay.
I guess-
Ladies, can we go ahead and start then? Thank you.
Turn that down.
The February 27th, February 27th meeting of the Utilities Commission come to order. Before we start, we'll have the pledge to the flag and a prayer to open the thing. Ms. Brits Parker, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please bow your heads. Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Thank you for the country that you have given us. Help us tonight as we deliberate and try to bring good things to this city and the Utilities Commission of New Smyrna Beach. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Ms. Simmons, would you please would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Brits Parker,
Here?
Commissioner Davenport,
Here.
Commissioner Griffith,
Here.
Commissioner Holcomb,
Here.
Chairman Beanbaum.
Here. Mr. Mitchum, we going to change anything tonight, or are we going to try to run with it?
We're going to try to run with it, sir.
All right. Public participation. Is Bob on the phone at this point?
We're having different. Mr. Tolley?
Glenn, just sit tight a minute, would you please? Brandy?
Yes, sir.
Would you, and when you get him, we'll just tell him to cool it for a minute. I want to keep the place running.
You bet.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Alrighty, and this is an easy one. What I was trying to do was first of all, for the record, my name is Glenn Storch.
Thank you.
I was attempting to find some solutions to avoiding tearing up Saxon Road. Saxon was going to have to be cut in order to provide access. It is my understanding, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate this, that the engineers and the staff engineers have been working together and have come up with a solution to solve that problem, so Saxon will not have to be cut still provide service. That is a great thing. It's a great thing, as you can imagine, not just for my client, but also, of course, for the traveling public, because that would have knocked Saxon out for who knows how long. And I wanted to compliment staff on working on that, and also compliment them on working on the Williamson alignment. I've been talking to the county engineer's office, and my understanding is they're working well together. The county has basically agreed to where agreed with the staff as to where that alignment can be. So I think we're in good shape, and I look forward to the presentation tonight from Derek. That's it for me.
A lot different
It's a
than I
record.
thought. Thank you. Anybody have any questions for
It's
Mr.
just a record for Glenn.
When people
That's
work
great.
together and solve problems, that's a good thing.
I was
That's
going
what
to
it's all
say,
about.
did you earn your money tonight?
No, I did not.
Okay. Thank you, Glenn.
That's good news.
Anybody else? Anybody?
It sounds like
Hang on a minute, let's see if we have Mr. Tully. All right,
He's probably wants to say something.
this is Mr. Tully, who is a veteran, and he's too sick to be here, and he wants his 3 minutes, and go ahead, Mr. Tully.
Mr. Tolley?
Yes.
Okay, can you go ahead and speak?
Good evening, Commissioners. I am Bob Tolley of 814 Pine Shores Circle in New Smyrna Beach. And I'm calling to both complain and to give notice to matters pertaining to what I believe to be the misconduct of the members of this commission in violating the public rights and trust. Let me first remind everyone on this board that the citizens and ratepayers are the owners of this utility, as they are financially responsible for what takes place regarding the same. You have a legal and moral obligation to them, not the city commissioners or staff. The latest incident pertains to the selection of retaining Attorney Cloud as a supposed independent outside counsel, whose job it is to provide the members of this commission with a second opinion pertaining to their ability to use the utilities money to assist the city and private developers in advancing their projects. In essence, tossing the present developers agreement that protects the citizens and ratepayers in the garbage. They, along with the city commission, want the utility to serve as a bank. Transactions have already taken place, with others to follow, waiting for the Cloud opinion to allow their efforts to move forward. If memory serves me correctly, we have been down this road before, when the City Commission, led by Attorney Gummy, attempted to, in essence, take control of the utility and its money, which generated an in-depth legal opinion being completed by Attorney Clay Henderson from the firm of Holland & Knight, a well-known and industry-respected law firm. Now, I have read Attorney Cloud's opinion, which was clearly not completed at arm's length, as it all but slipped the document replete with a wish list of the items of the commissioners who want to benefit the city, their developer partners, supporter and friends, and in many cases themselves. As many as 7 of our 10 elected and appointed officials could be financially gaining, and that is a shame. The bottom line is that the Cloud opinion is not an independent document, was completed in the dark and not as arm's length, and as such needs to be thrown out. The opinion has been compromised as it simply regurgitates Attorney Gummy's previous rants, Finally, I am giving you all notice that within the next 20 to 30 days, an Ethics Commission complaint pertaining to these matters will be filed, along with 2 other federal level complaints. It's time to stop the craziness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tully. Okay, can anybody have anything to say? Okay, time for the consent items. Mr. Davenport, do you have anything you want pulled?
No, sir.
Jack?
L, if we could.
Al, hang on a minute. Ms. Bridge Parker?
Nothing.
I'm good.
Mr. Griffin? Okay, I want E, G, J, L, and H. I'll say E, G, J, L, and H. Can I get a motion to
I make a motion to approve items A, B, C, D, F, I, and K.
J.
I'll second.
been regularly moved and second. Anybody want to say anything? Please, Debbie.
Commissioner Rich Parker,
Yes.
Commissioner Davenport,
Yes.
Commissioner Griffith,
Yes.
Commissioner Holcomb,
Yes.
Chairman Beanball.
Yes. Most of these were answered for me, but I want to say something about them. It appears, I'm going to start from the bottom on the L. It appears to me that IT has become a money pit, and we are just pouring money into this thing. And if you would, please. We've spent, if I remember correctly, close to $500,000 to get this place straightened out. Now we're spending another 50. Please educate me.
Absolutely. So with this, it's a CCIE, which is Craig Belcher, who's worked with the utilities for 15 plus years. He is, so that you understand, this is interesting, fewer than 3% of Cisco engineers achieve CCIE certifications, accounting for fewer than 1% of network professionals. So he's a very high-level expert. He does all of our switching and routing for our Cisco infrastructure. Currently, we do not have someone to do that. We have Jason Michael, who's our infrastructure engineer. He's responsible for our storage, our SANs, our servers, our virtualization, our disaster recovery. But he is next week going to school to learn a lower level of the Cisco infrastructure, which he will be taking over. But at this time, there's no training. That's not something that someone without knowledge can do for our organization. It's all securities, it's firmware, it's patches. So as we're moving forward and we're transferring knowledge, we can't just jump over to that and not have our system protected. And as far as the IT bleeding, I don't believe that that's correct. We had to really work from the bottom up, and we have changed the entire data center. We've moved it to a different location. We've updated everything, every server, every SAN, every virtualization, every switch, because people previously had purchased things that were either close to end of life, end of maintenance. So when you purchase things like that, they're no longer protected under security. You can't put patches on them, you can't put the firmware on them because they're not supported anymore. So we had to upgrade. So moving forward, we have 4 employees, not including myself, that takes care of the entire infrastructure, and that includes all phones, all tablets, all laptops, all computers, including the servers, the SANs. So to have some outside help, it has to be unless you let us hire someone that level, which is very expensive. So that's why we have a blanket purchase order with Craig Belcher, and we use him when needed.
I have a question, if I could ask it.
Yes, ma'am.
Was this already planned for in our capital plan at all, Mr. Belinsky?
Mr. Belcher does mostly O&M work, and as such, we had budgeted for general services of this type of nature within our IT department for the year. So this is not an unknown or unplanned for thing.
Okay, so it was anticipated and budgeted that this was going to be needed?
Yes.
One of the questions I had, you brought up a point of, is that position needed? Because that's one of the things I always ask. Is,
Right.
are we kind of rowing with not enough rowers? And I would much rather, instead of pay an outside vendor to come in,
Right.
I would much rather hire a human being to come in here, because problems don't necessarily happen at Tuesday at 9 o'clock when we have them scheduled to come in. So,
Well, luckily with Craig, he's 24/7. I've reached out to him at 3 o'clock in the morning with disasters. He helped us do the hurricanes. He's very available. And with IT, that's how it is. It's not an 8 to 5 type situation. It's at the worst possible times.
I mean, in comparison to what the rate would be to hire that person, which that person would do other things, I'm sure.
Correct.
In what we're paying Mr. Belcher on an annual rate, when you go back and you look at historical numbers, does it make sense to? Because
Well-
again, we keep, here's, and again, sometimes we say it the wrong way. I would much rather have a competent human being hired on staff to help you guys achieve what we're trying to do, which is the best system we can provide with the best securities. And that's always been my frustration. Do y'all have enough? How we got here it's over with.
Right.
Moving forward, before I go spend $52,000, which we're gonna, because obviously we need this.
Right.
But if we're gonna keep bringing Mr. Belcher back an annual and spending this money, I think we're better off hiring a person. Why are we not doing that?
Well, right now with Jason, he's going to get it's not the same, it's a CCNA, but he's going to be able to do the lower level installs, configuration, operations. So that's going to take some of that off of Craig, and he'll continue with the higher level. So that's why we're trying to move him out that way, coming up from the bottom up with training with our current staff. In the next budget, we are hiring someone that's going to be in charge of cabling, routing, switching. So we are hiring someone, still a lower level, but we are hiring someone for that position.
And that's, I guess my question is, looking forward, I mean, it's not like we're gonna get smaller in the next 10 years.
Right.
So, are we better served making a 10-year investment now in a person versus, as you say, working from the bottom up and putting a Band-Aid on, to eventually gonna be in that position to go, we need the person anyways?
Right.
Do you, if you had to look out 2, 3, 4 years with the growth, what's coming? I mean.
Well, if that was an opportunity that I was presented with, I'd love to have a CCIE on staff. I mean, that would be amazing. But it's the cost, and if does it fit into our current budget of how things work, So right now I'm working with what we have, and we're doing the training, and the staff that I have right now are amazing, and they're doing more than you could believe. And we've changed the whole infrastructure. I know that you think that we're bleeding, but we've stopped the bleeding, and we actually now are far surpassed that
Well,
time.
I would rather have you stand in front, because this is what I do believe. You probably know more about this than anybody in this room. And you've been through this. I would rather have you stand there and tell us, maybe not tonight, but listening to the words you're using, and, it sounds like, boy, would be a benefit to us. I would much rather invest in a human being than a vendor. And moving forward, it sounds like you would love to have that person. Let's look at it. Let's look at the feasibility of it. But I hope that we, the cost of doing business is just the cost of doing business. And if we don't have the right staff, we end up paying more because we don't have the right staff, and it ends up costing us more in the long run. So I want to make sure you have the resources that we told you a year or ever how long ago we talked about this,
Right.
that you can actually run that department with the pieces you need to be as efficient as you possibly can. So that's what I'm looking for. It's not that was my question. I'd much rather have you raise your hand sooner than later, so we don't have to keep paying the vendors.
Right.
That's all it is. All right, thanks.
Randy, is Jason getting schooled that he can move up and take that position, and you can hire a guy or gal that is of lower?
Well, Jason's is what he's going to train for next week, and then a following week in April is lower level, but he's already responsible for so much in the infrastructure that to do something like that, I think, would be a burden on him. He can do what he's doing now and then add this to it, but to go to that next level, like I said, it's 1% of Cisco engineers that make a CCIE, so it's a commitment to your life to become something,
Okay,
of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about,
No.
we're not hoping that Jason gets there.
No.
We know that he's not going to.
Well, I mean, he could, but it would be a commitment to his life to change it, and
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
Do you have any idea, Brandy, like, what are we talking? Like, to hire someone of that caliber?
I've never looked into that, but just because of the school and what it takes and what a small percentage of engineers for Cisco actually are CCIEs, I would assume it would be 100 plus for something like that.
Could we possibly, Mr. Mitchum, could you research that and come to us at the next meeting and let us know what we're looking at? Because I'm very afraid, like, Brandy, you've been amazing. You have done a great job. You explained things extremely well. You know, you've done a really good job.
I appreciate
But
that.
I understand enough about this to know that all these different people that you have on your staff are probably already working a lot.
Absolutely.
And, you know, we are also at the risk of losing people who we've trained and really know this infrastructure because, hey, I know it's really hard to get good IT people, and, you know, and they also want to they want to be challenged, they want a certain lifestyle, and if we burn out existing staff, we just keep going backwards.
Right.
You know, so if it's $100,000 or more for this kind of person that could make us really have a solid staff that's going to stay with us and learn and be the best they can be, I'm interested in taking a look at that. So do you think that would be possible?
We are looking, as I said, we're doing the budget right now, and we will be, Ms. Keenan and I will be getting together to see where we're going as far as more staff. We will, but as you said, this we need right now with Mr. Belcher. But going forward, we will be looking at adding what staff to fill out the complement of everyone. So we've got a full staff running the whole department.
But I mean, I'm thinking we need that level person of Mr. Belcher. It sounds to me, as
And
opposed to
we will
keep
look
throwing
at that.
$50,000 a pop. Yeah, I'd rather pay him $100,000 a year and have him 24/7.
Well, we can look and see what that would take.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brandy.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. On the summer interns, could we get a 2 or 2.5 minute briefing on what we're doing, when we're doing it, where we're going to put these young people, and how many are we going to do that are paid, and how many are we going to do that are not paid, and what's the difference, and is there, educate me, just 2 or 3 minutes, please.
All right, Brittany Pitcher, Director of Human Resources. We are looking at an internship program to have here. It's a very good program, not only for recruitment in the future, but also just advertising for us as an employer in the colleges and even the high schools. So internships can be in a variety of areas. We had one through the fall semester in IT, and they worked out very well, did a wonderful job, and loved working here, and actually got a job because of Brandy. And but engineering is another area where interns can be helpful. Finance might be an area where interns are helpful. So they're not being used as an effort to subsidize staff or to take burdens off of staff, but truly an educational arena where we can help impart into them, and we also receive a benefit from that as well. Obviously, you can't not have them and not have a benefit from that. To be determined whether they would be paid or unpaid really has to be determined on a case-by-case basis. If they're coming to us from a college, a university, and that's part of their program, and they're getting school credit for that, and they're receiving more benefit than we are from the arrangement, then they're typically an unpaid intern. High school students would be considered an unpaid intern if they needed to do some sort of work program. A paid intern, maybe a higher level one, where they might be receiving school credit as well, but again, that's a case-by-case basis. Not everyone pays interns, but some companies do, so if you want to be competitive and be the place that interns want to go to, you typically need to pay them for that. We have set out in our policy a maximum. Right now, we don't want to overwhelm ourselves with students here, but we don't want any more than 3 at one time or 6 in a calendar year right now. Sweet.
Okay, how do you advertise, or how do you let our schools know that you're looking?
So we go through the universities for that. They have specific people who deal with internships, and the IT intern we recently had, we went through Daytona State for. So I'll be in contact with different universities and state colleges.
I got to tell you, I think that from as hard as it is to hire, and it is, because really, when people think of the utilities, they're thinking linemen, making things light up, making water flow, I mean, it's more to it than just that.
Absolutely.
And with a 4% unemployment rate or where we're at, you have to become creative. I would 100% support the paying, because again, it's kind of like, do you put your foot in, or do you not put, if you're gonna do it right, and make sure that if we'll stick out from the pool of people that are gonna go apply for this. We want to be the one that people go, oh, that's the one I want to go to. Because if we're trying to attract the very best, let's not get cheap in the process of maybe beating ourselves down to the mid list or the second or third opinion. So I think it's great, especially now. When unemployment's high, it's a little different story. When unemployment's low, we can spend it one way or another. We're going to spend money finding employees, so I think it's a great idea.
Mr. Davenport, got anything?
No, sir. I agree with with Commissioner Holcomb, Chairman Beebe.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
On G, Derek, is this not the project that when we first let this bid go, that they mismeasured how much pipe we were going to need, and they came back to us and we had to buy another 20 feet of pipe?
Yes, sir.
So this thing has been a rat's nest since the start? Am I being unkind, or?
I would say that's a little harsh as far as a
Okay, a
rat's
mouse's nest, but go ahead.
The data that we got back from our contractor that built the water main initially was 10 feet off the mark. We gave that information to the county. The county redesigned their construction processes around our information. And the information was bad, and they hit our water pipe. And they hit it in the worst possible place, that being 30 feet under the river where you can't make a repair. We've notified that contractor that we intend to file a claim against them for the repair work that's before you now.
It just seems to me, in vetting these contractors, to make the two of these, to measure, when you're measuring 100 feet and 120 feet, either somebody can't read the ruler or somebody made a transposition error when they wrote it down. And I realize that I sit up here in an ivory tower and I'm not down there in the mud. But the next time what's the contractor's name, Macero?
I'd have to look at my agenda package to see who the name of the contractor is. I deal with, sorry, Mr.
No-
Chairman,
no
I deal with
problem.
commission
No
contractors all day long, so they kind of go in and out.
All right.
The mismeasurement on the original contract is not tied to what we're dealing with tonight. That was a lesson learned, and we now put in our bids that the distances is horizontal distance only, vertical distance needs to be accommodated by the contractor. So we should never see a change order for the bell shape of these directional drills again.
I'm going to have a real trouble approving this contractor in going forward. I'm just telling you that right up front.
The former contractor?
Yeah.
That contractor is working for us now, has worked for us in the past, and they do a decent job. I don't know where a 10-foot discrepancy came from. Pretty sure it was their subcontractor, but certainly understand your statement. We've been dealing with it as well. It's a frustration level from my department's efforts as well, because we've done something, we did what the county asked us to do, and now we've got to do it again. The problem now is that we weren't under the gun before, but we are now, because we have a construction project that we have to, there's an open window and we have to make sure we're through it, to put it that way.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry, any questions? No, I'm the only one, I guess, okay. Mr. Hoover, I have a question on E, and what it says is that we have to make an addendum to this contract because we're processing more solid waste is not the right word, that's garbage, solids in the waste stream. And one of the statements that was in the presentment was that some of it is coming from sewers that we are lining, and we are capturing more of the sewerage, and it's not leaking out. Do you have any percentages or any ideas on what?
You've got that all backwards.
Oh, okay.
Dave Hoover, Water Resources Department.
Thank you.
What we have there is, I've tried to explain this before, our older sections of gravity sewer, the pipes that collect the sewage from the home through the manholes to the lift stations. A lot of those are old, what we call VC pipe, vitreous clay pipe. They crack over time, settlement, whatever. And in comes what we call inflow and infiltration. Infiltration is groundwater that leaks into the collection system and comes. That dilutes the flow of human waste and whatever comes from garbage disposals. Those are the organic loadings we get at the plant. If you fix all those leaks, what you get is a lower flow. You increase the capacity to the plant. Those are the reasons we make those investments. So that's what I've tried to describe before. No solids leaked out.
I didn't mean that the solids leaked in.
Things leak in, which is clear water.
Okay.
So that dilutes the concentration. So the flows we see, that's what I tried to put in this agenda item so y'all understand technically what's going on. We had a 7%, roughly 6 or 7% flow increase last year. But at the same time, we had a 17% increase in solids, which means the strength of the waste coming into the plant are stronger. So we're going to produce more microorganisms, the biomass that we grow in that plant, to take out the nutrients that are in the flow so that we get a clarified effluent that's good enough for outfall or public access reuse. That all has to go together. And if we don't take it out, it's just not going to go that way. So we produce more biosolids if we get more in. I mean, we're not just producing this on our own. So we missed the forecast. Our budget is nothing less than a forecast. And if you look around the town, you look at the roads are over capacity. You look at the condos on the beach side. Their parking lots look to be about 80% full because there's been a harsh winter up north. The people from Central Florida are reading the billboards. New Smyrna is Orlando's beach. They're all here. That's what's happened.
Okay.
So we've missed our forecast by quite a bit. We need $119,000. If we have that, we can continue to operate. Within 3 weeks, if we don't have that money, it'll be coming out on the ground.
Go ahead, Jack.
Obviously, I don't see this thing slowing down any. So when you go to move forward to forecast next year, I mean, obviously, you know, again, when it pops and when it grows, you know, who knows what's really going to take off. What are you doing? How do you,
We bumped it up.
Did you, so
We've been working on the budget the last few months.
Yeah. For next year, I understand this year. I'm talking about moving forward.
Right. So we've got a couple things in the master plan that were first outlined to you by Quentin Hampton about maybe 8 months ago. Brad Blaze talked about the things in the master plan that we need.
Okay.
Right now, we've just completed converting off of gaseous chlorine at the wastewater treatment plant to bleach.
Okay.
That's a big safety aspect, and as development encroaches closer and closer to our property, right now, Coastal Woods right across the street going to be building. That's a great move. That was part of our long-term plan. The next thing is the biosolids thickening. If we have improved thickening, we can concentrate those biosolids down to less hauling. If there's less hauling, the $400,000 we're going to spend this year will become less.
Okay.
We'll be able to do what the contractors are doing for us. Lastly, the next thing on our agenda for that plant is digestion. That is a Class A treatment plant that has no digesters. Digesters reduce the amount of biosolids by 50% more than likely. The plant that we're operating was planned with digesters. in 1996, it was going to cost $27 million to build the plant. The powers at large decided there were certain things we did not need. One of the things was the sludge process. We have a very vestigial sludge process. We have outstanding treatment for the liquid portion. We're now meeting all the river standards and the reuse standards, just like the plant was designed to. But for biosolids, now we're up to $400,000 a year because those things were trimmed from the plant. So when that comes in our master plan, we dearly need it, and it will pay for itself.
Well, could you do me a favor, if I'm here or not here, whoever who's sitting here, that you kind of, you show that math of this is the consequence of that decision, looking back, we can't afford to make that decision, the wrong decision again, to shortchange. I mean, because when I look at our community, we're not going backwards. I mean, we're not getting smaller, whether we all agree with it or disagree with it. So we better do it right.
We do.
And give ourselves the right. This idea that somehow saving now is going to save me later, it doesn't work. It just drives me nuts when I hear it. Like I said, if I'm here, stand up, stomp your feet, make sure that you make that case for us, because like I said, it drives me nuts.
I understand.
Penny
I'm right there
smart,
with
dollar
you.
dumb.
As a microbiologist,
I'm not that.
I made my points when that was decided. Before that time, we land applied all of our biosolids from the small plant that was on the North Causeway. We won second place in the state and in the nation for our beneficial use of biosolids award competition in 1994. That little plant had outstanding solids treatment, but not outstanding liquid treatment because it was too small. You need a bigger plant with more tankage. That's why we needed to go out west. And the original 100 acres we tried to get, the people that owned the 1,100 acres said, "You've ruined our land values, you need to buy it all." Well, guess what? It's going to be very helpful for us in managing our utility operations. It will be priceless.
So as am I looking at, like, 'cause we're looking at about a 25-year window since the 96 that you're talking about. Is it roughly 400? And again, I'm trying to understand the mechanisms of the decision. Are we saying it's $400,000 a year that we've been spending for 25 years? Or, because when you say 27 million, if it only cost me $100,000 for 20 years, I'll pay the $100,000.
It's grown to the 400.
It's grown to the 400.
Initially, before 1996, we spread it all ourselves. All we had was the price of treating it, one employee who was called the biosolid spreader,
Right.
and a big truck. And that truck we had all the sod farms out here. They loved our material. It was so far digested down to mineral that only had a sort of a mild smell like hay for a day or two.
Right.
When we got the new process, we were told we're just going to add lime to it. We'll pass vector attraction and pathogen reduction. But I told them it's not going to be digested. It'll smell like roadkill for 2 to 3 weeks. And within 1 year, every agricultural user said, we can't do it. So initially, we were using somebody that hauled our stuff, and it was about $200,000 a year. We went from very nominal cost to $200,000 a year, then it went to $250,000, then it went to $350,000, and now we're at $4.
Right, and 20,
So
that's 10
you're
million,
absolutely
10 million
right.
over 5. That's
When
10
we make those decisions, it's going to cost longer in the long run.
What have we spent back in 96 had we built that plant, Dave?
What did we
27
spend?
million, right?
It was trimmed to 16 and a half.
So
10
now we
million.
saved 9 million to
We said
to
$9
spend
million
10.
bucks difference?
Yes, sir.
Right.
And I have done everything I could and gotten a lot of support to get a lot of the things that were trimmed put in there along the way. Everywhere we could squeeze it into the capital budget, finance, and a supportive CEO and an engineering department that understands operations have done that. Not only just in the wastewater plant, the water plant too.
Okay. Any more questions for Mr. Huber? Thank you, Dave.
Sure enough.
That's all I had.
Mr. Beanbach, didn't you
yes.
also pull item H?
Yeah, he did.
I made a mistake. I'm sorry.
So I move for approval for items E, G, H, J, and L.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Commissioner Rex Parker?
Yes.
Commissioner Davenport?
Yes.
Commissioner Griffith?
Yes.
Commissioner Holcomb?
Yes.
Chairman Beanbaum?
Yes. Okay. Mr. Belinsky. As everybody knows, Mr. Belinsky is only going to be with us a little bit longer, and as I told you coming in, thank you very much for your service. He's going to play golf, so you guys that want to play golf, Mr. Belinsky is available after next month. How many, before you start, sir, Ms. Pritchard, how many applications do we have for Mr. Belinsky's job so far? Do we have any?
Yes, we received quite a few. We have interviews lined up next week.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Mr. Belinsky. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, for the month ended January 31st, 2018, the Utilities Commission's change in net assets for the combined system is a positive $1,144,454. This amount includes $723,000 recognized as a capital contribution and receivable for the now completed State Road 44 sewer project. The balance in the fuel and purchase power account is an over-recovery of $2,006,000, which is a slight reduction of approximately $29,000 for the month. Questions?
And you're okay with this, where we are?
Absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Davenport? Good. Jack?
No.
Yes. Mr. Belinsky, first of all, I want to thank you for your service. I was really shocked to see, as a result of an addendum that was issued on the audit RFP, to learn for the first time that you're retiring at the end of March.
Correct.
How long has this been the plan?
It was an epiphany, and it was just time to turn the page and start a new chapter.
So when did this epiphany occur before you?
End of January.
Okay. So it's just, I was so shocked to see it. We have so many important decisions that are going to be made over the next several months. You know, finding a replacement for Mr. Mitchum, now replacing you. A lot of, you know, we have an audit RFP that's on the street, and certainly the fact that you would not be here, you know, for the next audit is important information. So how were you all anticipating that, as a commission, that we were going to find out that you were retiring?
I'm not sure.
Because the way that, well, because
Yeah.
you're a material position. You and I have sat down and met several times. I've really enjoyed working with you. I think that we're really getting on the right page. And I was just so shocked to see that you were retiring, and the way that I learned that was looking at an addendum that was issued for the audit RFP. I'm treasurer of this commission, and I didn't know that our CFO was retiring in 6 weeks.
That information was sent to all commissioners immediately upon them finding out.
Okay, so that was at the end of January?
Correct.
The day after, or the couple days after I got it from him.
Okay. Well, I missed that, but I'm going to miss you.
Thank you.
Very much so. But, you know, so you don't think you're getting too easy of a deal here, I do have a couple questions for you. Just to understand, when I take a look at page 12 of your report, it's the changes in net assets, or the income statement for the whole system. And I'm seeing that this fiscal year to date, for the, let's see, October, November, for the 4 months ending January of 2018 versus the same 4 months of the previous year, that from operating income standpoint, we're up $1.4 million in revenue. We're up approximately $600,000 in operating income. Our capital contributions are up, let's see, about $900,000. So overall, you know, we are about $1.4 million. Just like as you had indicated, we're $1.14 million ahead of where we were, more than that, same time last year. So how does that compare to budget?
Can I get my book?
Thank you.
Okay, the capital contributions are significantly higher than last year because of the sewer contribution for State Road 44 and the associated receivable from, whether you call it the city or the lot owners on 44 that are benefiting from the installation of that sewer line. That was recorded in January. Obviously, didn't have that the year before.
About how much was that?
$723,000.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And then, of course, our operating income for the
Yes.
4 months is about $600,000 more than it was the same time last year.
Correct. January's electric sales, because of the significant cold weather in late December and January, were significantly higher. If just even for the month of January, you're talking 3.8 million this year versus 2.8 million last year. So that's $1 million more in sales of just electric, which is the primary driver of this utility, everybody knows, this year versus last year.
And so we do that much better. I mean, our margin on that.
Is significant
Okay.
for electric, that's correct.
Okay. Okay. And then finally, page 17 is the new form that you've been doing for us to keep us a little bit, help us understand better what we're doing with
Capital,
capital and projects $500,000 and over.
right.
So I'm seeing what we have there is you've got, in the other column, under funds spent for January, we've got a negative number of 175,000.
I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay,
I don't
okay, 'cause
know off the top of my head.
Yeah, that was
but
unusual to me.
yeah,
I didn't understand how we went in the other direction. And then under completed projects, we've got this item for the month of January of 217,000. I was just curious what that was.
I'm not seeing, oh, the 217. Two items I'll have to get back to you with.
Okay.
I don't do the form anymore.
Okay. Okay. And then I have another question. I don't know if it's probably not appropriate to ask of Mr. Belinsky, but since it's like financially related, I want to know if I could ask someone about addendum that was issued for the audit RFP. I don't know who the right person is to ask that question. An addendum was issued with.
Correct.
Recently.
Right,
And,
last week.
Who's responsible for issuing that addendum?
For actually putting it out, the materials manager.
Okay, and what about for the contents of it?
Most of that came through me.
Okay. So one of the things that I noticed was in there is that there was an addendum that added a code of silence to that RFP, which basically said that no firms that were interested in submitting a proposal to do the UC's audit had the right to contact anyone other than the purchasing manager. So, you know, I got a problem with that. I think we had made it really clear as a commission that we wanted this 5-member body to be in charge of that process. And we, as a body, approved the draft of that RFP. And that RFP did not have a code of silence. So I got a problem when somebody, without consulting me on something I've already voted on, says who I can and cannot talk to. So who was responsible for issuing that addendum that added a code of silence to that RFP?
I can't answer that question.
That would be me.
And you just did that, Mr. Mitchum, on your own?
After discussion and of some of the questions we got, we had some people contacting commissioners directly. That is not a common practice, and we were trying to get it to where it came back through so everyone could get the same information, and it would be distributed back through our addendum process.
Okay, and I got to tell you that actually maybe that has not been a common practice at the UC. I know it hasn't been. But it's a pretty...
Not expressly stated as such, but it has been common practice.
Here, but not in the industry. Not in the industry of auditors proposing on audit jobs. It's not common practice because it's what I did for 37 years.
Mm-hmm.
And by far the majority of governmental entities that submitted audit RFPs did not have a code of silence. So I have a problem with, we spent a whole lot of time on this. I spent a lot of time on the draft of the RFP. In my opinion, if any firm wants to contact any one of us, if they're willing to take the time and do the homework to learn about us better and see what's important to us being the individuals that are going to determine who is going to be our auditor, they have a right to do that. And it doesn't sit real well with me that you all would have issued that addendum on considering everything that we did to issue the RFP to begin with. Because I can tell you it was very common practice for me to meet with the governing body of entities that I was getting ready to propose on. And I just, you know, it's just one more instance of I feel like we weren't listened to. You know, I didn't get a phone call. Nobody asked anybody about it. You just issued an RFP that changed the game. I didn't have a code of silence. I didn't have a code of silence in there on purpose, Mr. Mitchum. There was a reason it wasn't in the RFP, because I didn't think it was a good thing to have it in there. And you all went ahead and put it in anyway. There is nothing illegal and nothing wrong with a potential auditor contacting members of the governing body to understand things better. None of us had to meet with anybody. We don't have to respond. Anybody that doesn't want to doesn't have to. But it's not illegal to do that. And
Never said it was.
No, but you issued the addendum without consulting us.
That is
So
correct.
I'm going to ask you, maybe I need to make a motion, is to issue another addendum saying that any interested firms are free to contact us if they wish. Because I don't like you basically saying who I can and cannot talk to. I know
We'll
from
have to consult
experience
legal
that
on
you
that.
learn a lot from those discussions, and it can be very beneficial. You know, and it's what I did for 37 years.
Yes, responding to RFPs, correct, not issuing.
No, I was on the other side of the game, right, but I knew that those RFPs, the majority of them did not have a code of silence.
This was done trying to clarify something that was already in the RFP, that all communication had to come through the, our
Materials manager.
your materials manager. Correct. And that was not happening, so that's why I issued it. I was trying to make a clarification.
But it was pretty strong, highly unusual, that, any firms that
In our
contact
business, it is
people
not unusual.
would be thrown out. It may be unusual for the Utilities Commission, but it's not unusual in practice when you're dealing with a governing body that is responsible for hiring the auditor. And I feel like that right was taken away with us. So at this point, what I would like to do is ask, when is that proposal due?
I don't remember the exact date. I believe it's early March.
Okay. I'm going to make a motion to issue further clarification that states that any interested firms, if they want to contact the commissioners, they can feel free to do so. Keeping in mind that no commissioners should feel like they have to meet with them. Commissioners can handle it however they want, but I think that that dialogue can be very beneficial, and I don't want that taken away from me. So I'm making that motion.
Okay, it's been regularly moved. Can I get a second to that?
I'll second that.
Mr. Davenport has seconded. Is there any other discussion?
I'd just, counsel is here, so I'd like to hear his opinion.
The practice has been practiced. The entities which are subject to the Sunshine Law face different scrutiny than those that don't. The intent of this body has been in the past to maintain integrity in the affairs of any application or RFP, such as to provide equal status to every applicant. That is why we have discouraged individual meetings in every capacity. Is it legal? Yes. You may meet individually.
To Ms. Parker, what I understand is I understand your concern and why it would bother you, because again, we were changing something that we agreed on up here. And again, I got the email, I just didn't respond. But the hard part I have is a common courtesy, a professional courtesy to send an email out. These are our concerns, to understand. I listen to both sides. There's a legitimate argument. I don't know the industry. I know just because it's done here doesn't mean it's standard practice or it's the only way or the best way or whatever it is. But at least I could have made a few phone calls and go, does this make sense? Are we locking it down too much? If your opinion, Mr. Mitchum, does this make sense? Does this, in the industry of, all these municipalities, all these RFPs that go out, is that, to have that opportunity to just at least understand it a little bit better versus here's the addendum, we're gonna push it in and we're gonna do it. That's the frustrating part, because obviously we wanna pick the best auditing firm. We wanna make sure it's fair. We wanna be above board. We wanna be as transparent as we possibly can. But in order for us to do our job sometime, we need to do a little bit more 10 minutes, 15-minute presentation. That's the hard part for me is in anything that I do that makes big decisions, I like to spend more than reading a couple pieces of paper or getting 5 to 10 minutes with that applicant's time to better understand, in the 2 years that I've been here, our circumstances, our issues, maybe my concerns, how I would better answer that, how we don't get in an IT situation that we got into, should that have been brought up, what are things to better make myself aware, so when we do identify the people that we're gonna select from, we get better from it, we get better through the process. And that's, I just don't know how, you guys have me terrified to speak to anybody. I mean, it's for me, that's not a fun position. Like I said, I just didn't say anything. And I just, it's from a person that's owned his own business for roughly 20 years, how this works for me is tough. And I'm trying to understand your way. I give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm just not seeing it reciprocated to me. or us up here. I don't think it's done intentionally, but in order for me to make good decisions, I've got to do my research. I got to ask questions. I got to meet people. I got to talk to things. I got to ask my way through these things. I just see that being restricted. Here's your choices, make a decision. Everybody gets 5 to 10 minutes and you make it just, to me, doesn't seem like a very logical way of doing things and making these big decisions. So I say that to maybe understand maybe where Ms. Parker's coming, my frustrations. There's that word again. And again, it's not an intent thing. I understand y'all have done it that way for how long it's been done that way. It just doesn't mean it's the right way or the only way. I just want a voice when we start telling us that these are our only options, this is the way it's going to be. So hear us. That's all I ask for. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay.
May I take a minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
For clarification?
Yeah. Mr. Davenport, you want to say anything? Are you okay?
I'm not okay, but I'm okay.
Go ahead.
I understand your feeling, and maybe I can explain some of my presence as to which causes that frustration and where I come from as your legal counsel. And more than as your legal counsel, that's what you have hired me to do in my contract, and that is to provide strategic analysis and policy recommendations based on integrity. And they're the words in my contract. So when you ask me for an opinion, I have a choice to make. And that choice can be I can render an opinion that provides you the bounds of the law. And I equate this to, say, as Commissioner Griffith always says, let's stay in our lanes. And I can provide you that opinion that brings you to the left side of that lane, which is the legal wall from which you can make decisions. And I know you want that, and I appreciate that. But part of what you have hired me to do, well, you know it or not because it's in the contract, is to go beyond that and to render my opinion as to, based on the reasons for the creation of the Utilities Commission, its history, and how it is created, to go a little bit right of that, to help guide where there may be concerns. Now, take this case, for example. The one-on-one meetings, whether it be with this or you all wanted to with others and what have you. The left side of that road legally says you can do that. You can do that. Whether we have done it or not differently, that doesn't matter. My opinion is that, well, let me say it does matter as far as when I've been here, because I've tried to bring us a little bit further right, is that there is a probability of violation of the Sunshine Law. So what's that violation, and can I talk to anybody? That violation, potential violation in those one-on-one type meetings would be serving as a conduit, for example, where you are going to render a decision on some vitally important matter pertaining to this Utilities Commission, and as a conduit passing information such that the reason for the Sunshine Law is that the ratepayers, the public entity, has a right to know what it is you're considering it, how it is that you're considering it, and how the decision is made. So my conservative approach, and this is causing frustration across the board, but my conservative approach is, let's not even look like go there. I've made recommendations to commissioners that before meetings, for example, you may be talking about playing golf, but let's not give the appearance that we are discussing important decision-making ideas.
So here's again, this is what I'm asking for, and this is what we're all asking for. This dialogue that you and I are having right now, I deserve to have that dialogue before the addendum.
Before the what?
Before the addendum's issued, okay? My other issue is, I have attorneys that serve me, and I am all over the road. So in order for me to get centered in my lane, or the lane that's best suited, because I do represent the ratepayer, the people. I have to do it and understand it and do it the right way. But I might be in the right lane, I might be in the left lane, I might go in the ditch. But I gotta get there my way to make good decisions on behalf of the ratepayer. What I'm asking for, and what this board's asking for, is this dialogue to happen without the addendum. If we sit down and we had this conversation, and we got up and there's times I'm gonna go, you know what, Mr. Preston, I absolutely agree with that. That makes sense to me. That might be being in the ditch and you bring me back on the lane, but at least we have that conversation. I don't feel that I get that type of counsel. I don't get that type of, and it's frustrating. It's you know, I had the conversation with you out here. I said, you brought up policy. You are counsel. And counsel will give us that. I've said, give me counsel, and then if you want to add your policy opinion, I asked that of you a year ago. Please give them to me separated. I need a firewall between counsel and your policy. What's happening and is bothering me, and I spoke to this to Mr. Mitchum, is we've got no firewall and we've blended your policy opinion into your legal opinion. I don't know where the heck they separate. And that's hard for me to make decisions, and I've asked that I've implored that from you. So it's, I don't know what to do. I've been dreading this meeting all month. But that's how I feel, and you're my counsel. I'm in a tough spot here. How do you make decisions when you have a tough time with? It's frustrating. And Mr. Preston, I'll tell you one thing. Your integrity, I always believe, is above standard. I don't want anybody to take our conversation here to believe that it's not that. I just think we've interwoven the policy and the legal decision, and I can't get any clarity where one starts and one stops. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, let me shut this conversation off. I think what we're looking at is this board put out an RFP. We all voted on it and said it's going to be like this. Afterwards, somebody below us made a decision. They didn't like what was going on, or they didn't want what was. They wanted something to change. Instead of coming back to us and saying, hey, we want to change this because somebody just made the decision, and that should not happen. We wouldn't do that to you guys, and I don't expect it to be done here.
Chairman Biedenbaugh, may I?
Go ahead.
Again, that was issued as a clarification as part of an addendum, and we always issue an addendum to answer questions from respondents. It did not change what was already in it. It was a little stronger language, but what was already in it is all contact comes through the purchasing agent. And so it did not change. It was essentially a clarification.
It changed things to me. To me, it changed things.
I
do not agree. It was not a change. It was
all
a
right,
clarification.
all right. We don't agree here.
Fine.
Mrs. Fritz Parker has put a motion on the board to pull the addendum or to rewrite it. Which is it, Ms. Fritz Parker?
Well, issue another clarification, saying that, yeah, that interested firms can contact members of the commission if they so choose.
Do you have some wording that you're ready to give them?
That's fine. That's it right there. Just for further clarification, scratch this item on the addendum and know that if you wish to contact utilities commissioners individually, you may do so without penalty.
You clear, Mr.?
I have an issue with that. I apologize. I need to check on some things. I'm not saying I can't do that. I need to see what I need to do to accomplish that. Because I haven't changed anything.
Well,
it was stronger language, but it's strictly, it still has to come through a materials manager.
We have the ability, but that's not the case, Mr. Mitchum. I mean, I can tell you for years, okay? I'll give you Volusia County as an example. They have a 7-member commission.
Mm-hmm.
I was the auditor for Volusia County. I met with those county council members one-on-one, individually, before we got that contract, before I proposed, to get to know them better, to hear their concerns. There was no code of silence, and we were allowed to do that. It was not illegal. It was not wrong. It did not go through purchasing. They learned, I learned, and the county overall was well served because we were allowed that dialogue. And you're taking that away because it's always been that it went through your purchasing director. It's the way you've always done it, but it's not the way we want it to be. So although you have an issue with it, this 5-member committee is the governing body. And if we vote to do it, then I think that you have to do it. Even if you don't like it.
No, I said I need to check with legal, is all I said.
No.
No.
No, sir.
You said you need to check some things. It has to go on materials. It's like where I'm at with this thing is that, okay, no. This is the body. If we vote right now on this to do it, then you don't say, no, I'm checking. Then you need to do it.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments? Debbie, please call the roll.
Commissioner Ritz Parker?
Yes.
Commissioner Davenport?
Yes.
Commissioner Griffith?
No.
Commissioner Holcomb?
Yes.
Chairman Beanbaugh?
Yes. All right. Anything else, Mr. Belinsky? Okay, thank you. And again, thank you for your,
Very much.
thank you very much.
You're really going
and
to be missed.
You
And
will be missed, exactly.
Have a good
Agreed.
time golfing. I believe, Derek, you are up to tell us about where we're going to put a road and how we're going to use this 800 acres.
Last time I did this, there was feedback. Try not to have feedback.
Are you talking
Test,
about,
test,
are you
thank
talking
you.
about IT feedback or feedback from up here?
No, the audio feedback, sir. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. It's too low. My name is Derek Wainscott. I'm the Director of Engineering for the Utilities Commission. And we're here to talk about our acreage out west. A few months ago, I gave a presentation. It was basically a bubble plan of our property, and we ended on this slide, which defined, showed the bubbles of where we intend to put odds and ends of utility needs, including pump stations, water production plants, wastewater expansion, potentially solar arrays, reclaimed ponds. And you had asked at that meeting for some additional clarifications. I believe I stated in that meeting that while this is a bubble plan for parts and pieces, they may not be in the most appropriate locations. So I took the last couple of months, got with the other directors about where placement of these facilities would be better suited for our needs. And we came up with a similar presentation, except for I have accounted for the potential for wetlands, their impact on the bubbles. What you're looking at now, Mr. Chairman, is just the existing facilities, and I'll go through the slide presentation. And on a fiscal year showing what we intend to do each fiscal year. That being said, this slide didn't change. It's our existing facilities, which includes a wastewater facility, significant amounts of water mains, reclaim mains, force mains, electrical work, a well field, the head end building, which is where our IT infrastructure is, Smyrna substation, and various other utilities, including the FP&L transmission corridor. And at the north end, you can see where Williamson Boulevard currently intersects with Pioneer Trail. Any questions about the existing facilities on the site? In fiscal year 18, which is what we're in, we are working currently on the Smyrna substation expansion. We are also working on the reuse storage expansion, and we are working on creating some concept plans for fleet maintenance, generation operations, and water resources field operations so that those facilities could go into an RFP, request for a statement of qualifications so that a team of architects and engineers can submit for the development of those 3 sites. The reason we have to do an RSQ for those 3 sites specifically is because the estimated construction costs exceed $2 million, and that is my limit for assigning consultants to do work for our projects.
So you need us to okay each individual project, is what you're saying. Is that what I heard?
No.
Okay.
You will need to approve each individual project, but the RSQ process is going to be a selection of the team that's going to permit and design those facilities before they go out to bid.
Okay.
Okay?
Hey, Derek, let me ask you a question. It says that in the red there, proposed fiscal year 18 projects. We're on 18. I've built a few buildings here recently. I haven't been able to build a building and start it in March and finish it by December. So I'm just trying to understand this. We have a fleet maintenance building, generation operations, water resources, field operations, and my eyes just are, the substation expansion, is that right? So are you talking about fiscal year being the RFQ and then the RFP and then maybe construction in 19 and 20? Is that what I'm supposed to understand? So
That's correct, sir.
okay.
Yeah, I will not be able to start and complete these projects in fiscal year 18.
That would impress me.
I would have to break every rule I know.
How far is that fleet maintenance building off of 44? I mean, and I'm not asking for exact.
2,000 feet.
So I have a question related to that. You know, this is like my standard question, is that I'm concerned that we are inappropriately using valuable 44 frontage that perhaps would be better off being sold because we would get so much money for it. So what I want to make sure I understand is that with that fleet maintenance, field ops, and general ops buildings that are, you're saying that that's all going in fiscal year 17-18, so that's the year we're in right now, right?
It's not going in. We're working on the plans so that we can go out to bid. We probably won't be out to bid until fiscal year 19.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, what I'm trying to make sure of, what I'm trying to understand is that if those things are built there, is that going to preclude us to doing anything else with that property from where that, let's see, I guess the closest one to 44 seems to be the generation operations building?
Yep.
So does that preclude us from doing anything else with the property between that and 44?
Well, the other slides will preclude it. This slide doesn't necessarily preclude it.
What do you mean the other side?
Well, slides. I have more slides to
got
go
more
through.
slides.
He's got
Oh.
more slides. He's got.
Okay.
But perhaps that question might be best suited when I'm finished,
Okay.
Commissioner. Thank you.
You're welcome.
In fiscal year 19, we'll be finishing up the 3 projects we just mentioned, plus the other, oh, actually it's 5 projects, I'm sorry. And we'll be looking at expanding our central well field. And that will be coupled with St. John's permitting. Our CUP expires in 2020 and we'll have to renew it. As part of that CUP, we'll have to relocate some of the wells. The central well field is slated for 7 wells now. We built 4 of them, and the other 3 can't be built where they were located in the current CUP. So we're going to wait for the renewal of that permit, and we'll relocate the other 3 wells into a more usable location. That being said, these 3 points are adjacent to an existing raw water line. We can easily connect to it and pump it. I mean, they are literally from the existing raw water. And then in fiscal year 20, we are seriously going to need to consider the storage tank and pump station. The storage tank and pump station is going to increase pressure and fire demands in the western service area. That western service area is all of Venetian Bay and what is being constructed now as the Palms. Mr. Storch, what's the name of your project? Shell Point. And Shell Point, in anticipation of other projects south of 44, we're trying to place the pump station in an ideal location adjacent to our 20-inch water main, where we could feed it really quickly and then pump it back out into the largest main we have in the area. We'd also be looking at a reused water pond expansion. You'll hear Mr. Hoover and myself talk about 200 acres. We may not get to 200 acres, but it's a nice target number that we're looking for. That lake right there is about 75 acres in total size. And then as we move along, we'll be looking at moving the warehouse and procurement out into the middle of the facilities with transmission and distribution operations. Those two uses kind of need to go together. The warehouse provides allowable parking during emergency situations for the crews that we bring in. And it's a team that that the operations don't want to split up. They like those two facilities intertwined. And then as we get to 22, we're looking at a solar array and energy storage potential for that. And then in the next, that would be the next 5 years. And then the last 5 years, we get into another pond expansion. We get into the reverse osmosis membrane treatment plant, and we get into the WRF expansion. And then the slide that you've been waiting for, Williamson Boulevard. This is my best shot at it. I have tried to communicate with the county on several occasions. I've been unsuccessful in doing so with this alignment. I cannot confirm Mr. Storch's comment about the county accepting this alignment. They have not seen it, so I don't know that they've accepted it. I do know that the county has said that they are working with landowners, ourselves included. And this is option A. You see alternate A. In my opinion, this is the best place for the road. We met with the directors to determine if it met their needs for their other facilities that are going in there, and this, by consensus, is the best location to serve the Utilities Commission. We also came up with alternate B, which is further along the west. And I'd like to point out that the layout of our facilities was not taken into consideration with this roadway layout. I merely laid out the sites using alternate A. But there are two options, and the sites can be rewicked if alternate B is a preferred location for the county.
So you've obviously sent this to somebody, right? To the county.
This is the first time it's been shown to anyone.
Oh, okay, all right, fair enough. And again, I'm just trying to put it all together too. When we were here, and I don't know, even know who the gentleman from the county was that spoke that night. My recollection of his conversation was, we just moved the light because we had to, the line, we just couldn't accommodate. So this is our accommodation to them to basically pull that basically west on 44, and I think he made that statement, yeah, we just moved the light or something to that extent. Is that, no, I understand, right, very loosely, So we've given them two. I think alternate A is going to be what if they're going to choose from. But when are we expecting to get? And again, a road that has no money, a road that has no ownership, and a road that's just on a map right now. That I get all that. But foreseeing any problems down the road, when will you expect to hear back from them as far as that works, that doesn't work? Which, I mean, how do we, because my biggest concern was everybody I talked to, he's the CEO of the company, the one guy that didn't know anything about it, but everybody else knew about it. So I had real heartburn, and no one approached him and said, hey, Mr. Mitchell, this is a good idea, what do you think? He hadn't had that. So I'd love to get feedback from them to either yay or nay it, because I guess the longer it lays out there, the more dialogue and the more false information that starts to get portrayed. Let's try to identify a resolution to this, because there's just a lot of,
Counting on it.
yeah, it's just, I
Well, as Derek said, we have reached out a couple times, just yesterday, I believe,
Yeah.
again. So far, we haven't heard back directly.
I think, take a picture of this and turn around and hand that to Mr. Storch and say, if you would, please. I'm being very serious, Terry.
I know you are, but give me the opportunity to try my contacts with the county first before I involve Mr.
Go right ahead,
Storch.
sir. I'm not trying to
And
make
Mr.
your job.
Storch, I will admit that Mr. Storch had admitted that if we don't get anywhere, that he would be stepping in if necessary, so it's, we can make it work. I can certainly email the traffic engineers, and the gentleman that was here was Mr. Casbier, Tad Casbier.
I appreciate the effort on trying to find a solution for a county issue problem, whatever they're trying to do. And that's all that I ever asked, is that we were cooperative. And I think we are. And I thank you both for that, because, again, I was being told we weren't until I talked to you, and we needed to be asked on the date first before we could turn it down.
Right.
So, like I said, I appreciate that.
Mr. Davenport?
I'm going to agree with Ms. Bernadette regarding the 44 frontage on the property. I like that idea. I was just wondering, the red line here, is that adjacent to the current building that you have? I know this is all tentatively proposed and everything, but something that really bothers me as a resident of New Smyrna Beach for so many years is coming down 95. When you come down 95, you see the pavilion at Port Orange, and then you come the next exit, New Smyrna, and we see our sewage treatment plant out there. I guess that's sewage treatment or water treatment or whatever that's always really bothered me. So, that's a crucial, we're putting all this on 44, we're building it up. So I would hope we would give consideration as a board and staff to move back off of 44, to not have any buildings showing that may not be fitting in with the Venetian Bay and the multi-millions of dollars of business that's going to be going on out there. Just a suggestion.
Okay, thank you. Jack? Bernadette?
So is Alt A for Williamson Extension the thing that's going to change the game as far as us being able to do anything different with 44 frontage?
Not sure I understand that question,
I
Commissioner.
think he's the wrong one to ask that.
Who is the person?
You don't have any built, so I don't know that.
Okay.
Right, we haven't qualified anybody, right? If there's nothing even committed to, it's pretty easy to change. So that's, it's right now, the way I'm understood, it's a loosely conceptual, I think was your, right.
It's getting beyond loosely conceptual. The first document that I brought up was, I would consider a bubble, very loose plan. Some of the numbers that is not on the exhibits, just because I don't want to commit anything before we go to permitting through the district and get jurisdictional wetland lines determined. We're looking at significant impacts to wetlands for our projects, just so we can fit them in there. By rule of thumb, early on in my career, it was a 20-to-1 ratio. That being, if you impact 1 acre of wetlands, you have to preserve 20 acres somewhere on your property. We are in the ballpark of 70 acres of impacts on this current plan, which at 20-to-1 would be about 1,400 acres of preserved land, and we don't have that kind of property. So all property, whether it's frontage on 44 or not, needs to be very well considered before we consider selling it.
Go ahead, Jack.
And again, two comments. First of all, I always look at the good, did we make our best effort here? One of the concerns that was said to me was, that, oh, they're just gonna give us a road through. I was expecting to see the red line to go through all the blue line, the blue ponds. That land that we're giving up that's been presented is a very good effort as far as giving them good property also to work with, not saying, okay, just run your road through all our wetlands. So I truly believe on that side, that's a good effort from us to try to accommodate their need. The other thing is, we're getting ready to hire a CEO, which when is the date we're supposed to have the CEO hired? October 1st. So we're 6-8 months away
Soon.
from having that person identified. I would really love to have the old CEO, the new CEO, all the people that are going to be involved in that, to have that conversation, because I think, and bring all the parties together to a workshop, whatever it is, because again, I'd rather listen to everybody's input and figure out what our options are, because I don't know. I have no idea if 40 acres or 20 acres on the front of 44 makes sense or not. Our job is to take care of the Utilities Commission, make sure we have the best resources, assets, buildings, structures. I'm sure just like anything, angles and buildings and space can be made to accommodate just about everything. I don't know what the result is, but I'd love to have that. I'd love to have all those people at that table having that conversation once we get to hiring and make a decision on a new CEO to bring that person up. And also, like the new CEO that's coming in, that's one of the things I talked about in the interview process, to be aware of what is on the table coming in, because I think somebody that's maybe developed a piece of property, been through something like that, or at least share an opinion, would be kind of nice to hear prior to hiring versus after hiring. So that's my 2 cents for what it's worth.
Lee?
Just a couple of quick comments. Mr. Weinstein, thanks for the update on where your current thinking is versus the last review. But I still believe we need to do something a little bit more in the planning side of it with respect to priorities, options that we're talking about here, timelines, as well as dealing with the land issue. And that land issue needs to be dealt with separately, with probably some outside resources to help understand the marketplace, the land planning, what's possible, and so on and so forth. And we've discussed having this workshop where we can get people in here, like the county, and we know where the office is, right? I mean, maybe the phone isn't working, but get to the office. Meet them there with a Dunkin' Donuts coffee or something like that. We got to get together. And now is the time, not waiting for 6 months or 9 months or whatever. What I don't feel or sense is urgency here. This is a very, very big implication to the Utilities Commission and the ratepayers. We need to do a better job, I think, of getting this thing started, laying out what the options are, what the priorities are, and the timeline to pull all this together.
Just because the reason I ask that is the person that's going to be burdened with to execute the plan is the poor person that gets hired. And to me, if I was going to take a job on, boy, I'd like to be part of that decision or understand. And then we can have the workshops and we can set up the, who's going to be the players, whatever. But, think about coming into a job that you'd have if we just waited 2 months, or we could do a lot of the work you're talking about, getting there so we can bring that person up to speed. But I would be very reserved to saddle a new CEO with that plan without any input from him or her.
That's why I want to get started now.
Okay, all right, fair enough. All right, so maybe we're saying the same thing.
I think we are.
Okay, you can take it from here. I'm just going to sit over here.
All right. Lee, you done?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Derek, I really believe that you better think about a couple of 1,000 feet, and I'm not sure whether a couple of 1,000 is the right number, or 1,000 or 600 deep off of 44 that you aren't going to have. I just feel that the commission is going to look at, see if that property is worth selling. And this is Bill Biedenbaugh's personal opinion to you, who is our Director of Engineering, for what it's worth.
I understand.
Okay, all right. Any other thing that you want to tell us, Derek?
I don't believe
No,
so.
not that, yeah.
That you can actually say in a public meeting.
Anybody else have anything for Mr. Wainscott?
Waynscott.
Wainscott. Thank you, Derek.
You're welcome, sir.
Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Preston, you have anything to say?
Yes, sir. If it pleases the chair, I would like to reserve the comments under Agenda 5 to immediately following the presentation by Mr. Cloud.
Oh, I think I can accommodate that.
Thank you very much.
Any old business? Any new business? Okay. Because we have a report from Attorney Cloud, and Mrs. Britz Parker was the one who brought this and has shepherded it through, I'm going to turn the meeting over to you, Mrs. Britz Parker, to introduce Mr. Cloud and go from there.
Okay, thank you. Just so we don't forget, I'm going to reverse it and move for approval of the invoice that he has submitted, because 2 meetings ago, we forgot that at the end, and he had to wait a whole other month to be approved for payment. So I'd like to approve his invoice number, make a motion to approve his invoice number 10766-029 in the amount of $2,877.68.
I'll second that.
Moved by Ms. Britz Parker, seconded by
Second. Oops, I'm sorry.
Mr. Holcomb. Go ahead, Lee.
No, second,
Okay.
it's just getting a second.
Any discussion? We want to pay this man? Okay, go ahead, Deb.
Commissioner Britz Parker?
Yes.
Commissioner Davenport?
Yes.
Commissioner Griffith?
Yes.
Commissioner Holcomb?
Yes.
Chairman Beanball?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Thomas Cloud with the firm of Gray Robinson. A whole lot of thought and consideration went into hiring him, and actually, as a commission, we looked at 3 different law firms, 3 different attorneys, and Mr. Cloud was actually a name that Mr. Mitchum threw into the mix, and we were very impressed with him. I want to share a little bit with you about Mr. Cloud as well as his firm, Gray Robinson. Gray Robinson has been around since 1970. They employ a little over 300 attorneys with a specialization in municipal utilities. Mr. Cloud has been practicing since 1980, which is amazing. That's the year I started practicing public accounting. I didn't realize that. And he is experienced, as well as the firm, in all types of municipal utility items. And just a few things for me to explain to you. The representative cases that he has handled include the Bushnell Electric System acquisition, the Hillsborough County purchase of water systems, the Florida Power Electric franchise litigation that went from 1999 to 2005, the Florida Water Services Southern States Utilities, Bay County Gulf Coast Electric Co-op utility acquisition, the sale of Royal Palm Beach Utility to Palm Beach County, lots of other ones. The Orlando Utilities Commission sale of Indian River Power Plant in 2001, the Kissimmee impact fee rate dispute, St. Johns County territorial dispute, and actually the firm has represented 77 cities, towns, and counties within the state of Florida. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Cloud, and thank you very much, sir, for being here.
If I could, I've got a little outline of just sort of a summary. I thought it might be helpful. I want to clarify for the record, I don't believe I've recommended that you all change a single policy, that you all change a single document, or that you adopt anything. I am going to make a recommendation that you update a cost of service study. Because I think that before any utility makes any kind of a decision, you need to know what the financial impact will be, not only short term, but long term. Because if you're advising a utility just in the short term,
you're not advising it correctly. At least that's been my experience. My name's Tom Cloud. I grew up in Lakeland, Florida, which is a little town down in Polk County. And I've been with Gray Robinson since 1982. Before that, I was an assistant county attorney with Orange County. And before that, I worked for the Attorney General's office as an intern and with the Department of Environmental Regulation. But from 1982 until now, I've been working with a guy named Charlie Gray, who is still practicing law at 85 years old. And it's really nice to work with somebody that young because it makes me feel even younger. I did not expect to work in the field of utilities, but when I started for the county, they had a little problem with sewers. And the problem was the state was changing how they wanted them to dispose of their effluent, and we had to figure out how. You can talk about being on the right-hand side of the road or the left-hand side of the road, but when they change the location of the road and how much money you have to spend, it makes things very difficult. And that was a good learning experience for me. Most of the time I was carrying a briefcase for someone else. But it taught me about the value of cooperation and accomplishing goals. When I set about to do this report, I wanted to get as broad a view as I could looking back at the commission so that I can understand how that came to be created. And I wanted to get as much of a view of the documentation that existed out there. And it's always imperfect. I studied as a historian and archivist in undergraduate, and you can never get the entire written record. It's just not possible. Even if you start from ground zero today, there's some loss involved. And so that was the background on how I came to looking at trying to give you some advice on an expenditure policy. When there was no real proposal of, well, we want to spend this money on this project. See, that'd be easy. If you had, well, we want to spend, say, $1 million to build a road, can we do that? That's a simple one. But when you're asking in the abstract, and I think that you were asking in the abstract about the policy itself, that's a little bit different. And so what I tried to do was give you a roadmap. And this weekend we went and visited our grandkids, and Lee, I'm not as lucky as you. Ours are not quite, they're not 7 and 5. We've got one that's 3 and one that's 1 and one that was just born. And the 3-year-old, I wanted to try and relate to her what her 95-year-old great-grandfather did in World War II. My dad is still around and still lives in Lakeland. And he was in the Navy during the war. And his ship was torpedoed, and thank God the torpedo was a dud. And so he's still around. And so I gave her an analogy. I said, he's Popeye the Sailor Man, which they used to show the cartoons on the deck of his ship during the war. That was an easy thing to explain. And sometimes the more difficult the problems, the more you have to find simple analogies. So think about the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stones discovered by Napoleon's troops outside one of the pyramids had 3 different languages on it. And by the application of comparison of those 3 different languages, 19th century scholars were able to actually read ancient Hittite because they found that one of the 3 languages was a form of Greek that they could translate. And so what I've tried to do is give you a set of big picture ground rules for what you can look at in the future when you consider these policies. Now, the policies that you look at in the future are not going to be abstract. And I strongly encourage you to look at the financial impacts, which is why I think a cost of service study is so very important. I've given you just a little overview of some of the utility background I've had. I've been involved in over 100 utility system sales. And when you buy or sell a system, what you're really looking at, particularly when you buy, is a startup. How do you get into the business? It's really important. Ask Winter Park. The first municipal purchase of poles and wires in almost 100 years. There was some pioneering ground that had to take place in order to accomplish that. And just as recently as today, I was listening to them struggle with the problem of they are reinvesting a significant portion of money every year in undergrounding utilities. Why? Because that's important to them. And they have that flexibility to do that. Now, they could quit undergrounding for some certain period of time. That'd be $4 million less that they would spend in a year. But they have found that in their community, meaning the city which had the right to buy the utility to begin with, that they exercised in 2005 after a referendum and purchased from what is now Duke Energy, that the people of Winter Park wanted undergrounding of utilities. Might not result in the lowest possible rate for a given period of time, but it is absolutely a legitimate purpose to be looked at by a utility. You may not have the same concerns locally in New Smyrna Beach that they had in Winter Park. Winter Park's a little bit different place. But I point that out only as an example of why there's no one cookie cutter will fit every community when you look at this. And that's why there are guidelines in the cases and the statutes. So we looked at all the judicial and administrative decisions we could find that involved the Utilities Commission. Why? Because why be ignorant of it? In fact, there's some very informative decisions back then, including a judicial decision from 50 years ago that indicates that you set your rates just like every other city in the state of Florida. That was pretty eye-opening. We looked at your charter and all of the amendments. We looked at relevant city ordinances. You have a relationship with the city. And while you have a degree of autonomy and a responsibility that is separate from the city commission, you are nevertheless, by definition of the charter, a part of the city. So while you may not agree, you may take some very vociferous positions in negotiations, which I assure you has occurred in the other roughly dozen utilities commissions to which you are somewhat similar in the state of Florida. There's still some commonality element there that has to be considered when this commission makes a decision. Looked at utility commission minutes and agendas, the resolutions and policies that I received from your staff, documents in the city's possession. I wanted to see the other side of the coin. I know there's been some animosity in the past, and candidly, there's a little bit of gee and haw in every community that has a separate utilities authority. That seems to be the nature of the beast. They're not all designed exactly the same. For example, the Orlando Utilities Commission has the mayor that sits on the Utilities Commission. And here, that's not the case. You have a different model. Nothing wrong with that. It functions slightly differently. And I believe that that probably has something to do, if you went back far enough, if you had the extant written records, or you could talk to someone who was involved in the original referendum, you might get some idea of why there is that difference, since the Orlando Utilities Commission existed 40 years previously. And then we looked at relevant statute, cases, rules, policies, tariffs, correspondence, and the debt instruments you've issued. And we reached a conclusion that you have certain powers, and that in determining the guidelines for the projects that you may participate in, may, I want to underline may, not required. Every project is going to be different, every single one of them. And your financial condition at any given time is going to change along the line. And you cannot divorce making an expenditure decision from your financial condition, okay? It's very important. Project has to qualify, first of all, for a municipal public purpose. It has to. Secondly, it has to provide a substantial public purpose. Even if private interests are primary beneficiaries, there still has to be a substantial public purpose. And for you, you can't go out and finance the construction of a road or a stadium. You're limited to utilities, facilities. So now there's a broad range of utility facilities that you can be involved in, and those utility facilities might be part of a smaller overall project. There would be some nuances in how you could participate in that. But first of all, it has to be a municipal public purpose, has to have a substantial public purpose, even if it's part of a private purpose project, and it has to be for utilities. It has to comply with whatever service extension policies you have in place at the time of the project. I'm not suggesting you change any of your development agreement provisions. Why would I? I helped you create the agreement in the first place. I happen to like the agreement. I think it's great. But the agreement is not a general policy, and one size does not fit all, you may find, as you go forward. I believe that any project would have to comply with whatever financial policies the Utility Commission may have in place at the time of the project, and that you have to comply with the tests under your bond covenants. Now, if you read carefully your bond counsel's opinion, I think he and I see eye to eye on that. And I think we also see eye to eye on the fact that when you are going to take on a project, that there are still going to be some parameters you have to work within. For example, you have some capital improvement programs. And so if you were going to change something that was spelled out in a capital improvement program, in order to do that, you'd have to follow the procedures in place that led you to adopt the capital improvement program. But I think these are things that are accomplishable. The first thing you have to look at, though, is the nature of the commission. You are a part of the city. It says so in the charter. So you are a city agency. Why do I say that? Because there's a case out there that says entities like you are an agency of the city. Guess what that means? Now, this is something a lot of people, a lot of lawyers are not aware of. It's going to be very difficult for you to ever mount a lawsuit against the city. I'm not saying it's impossible, but there's a line of cases out there that deals with the state. And by a Supreme Court case, Justice Wells writing the opinion extends also to local governments. It says that an agency of a higher entity can't sue it. So there's a point at which there has to be cooperation there, because agencies can't sue the parent entity of which they're an agency. That's not 100%. There are exceptions to the rule, but that, generally speaking, is the rule out there. You are a political subdivision. It says so in almost all your bond documents and in a number of the legal pleadings that have been filed on behalf of the Utilities Commission. You are something known as the Municipal Utilities Commission, and there is a body, several texts out there in this area that talk about these, what are single-purpose local government commissions. Now, you're more than a single purpose. Why? Because you do electric, you do water, you do sewer, you have a multiplicity of utilities, but the single purpose is all under the aegis of utilities. You are a municipal utility. There are statutes that refer to municipal utilities. In Florida, you're not an investor-owned utility, and so concepts of rate base is different from customer base, you understand. A customer base is your base of customers that are divided into different classifications. Rate base is the amount of money that an investor-owned utility has invested in plant that is not contributed, okay? It may have been borrowed. But the Public Service Commission requires that investor-owned utilities typically have 50% invested capital, 50% contributed capital. Why? Because they want them to be financially healthy. And on that rate base, you are given a rate of return. That is not, by the way, how you set rates. That's how an investor-owned utility sets rates. How you set rates is typically by cost of service, determining what that service costs, and then there are certain additors that are placed on those rates. The last time you had a full-blown cost of service was 2006 by Black and Veatch. You did have a rate study. I was unable to find a cost of service portion of that study when I looked at it. That was from 2012. And I think that would be helpful to review periodically, and here's why. The projection, the 5-year projection in the 2006 study showed that you would have revenues by 2010 of $88 million. You have never achieved that amount of revenues. And I'm curious to know, and perhaps you will be too, why that is. I'm sure part of that is the recession, but there may be other reasons. It would be interesting to know, because certain assumptions were made based upon that number in that cost of service study. And last but not least, you're an electric utility under 366. Now, there's a term in 366 that deals with public utilities. You are not a public utility. A public utility is an investor-owned utility. You are an electric utility. Why? Because municipally owned and cooperatively owned utilities are exempted from the definition of public utility. So, big difference. And that was part of the original agreement that went into the creation of state regulation of investor-owned utilities. The state agreed they would not regulate the rates of city-owned and cooperatively owned utilities. Why? Very simple. It goes back to our Constitution. Our Constitution has a notion of representational democracy in it. No taxation without representation. And because city commissions are elected, there was a view that that concern was taken care of, unlike with an investor-owned utility, which is owned by stockholders. Now, there's another subtle difference here. You are not a nonprofit corporation. I looked. I knew even before I looked, because I understand the nature of these entities. So there are no stockholders out there as we think of them in a corporation. Doesn't mean that you don't have responsibilities to your ratepayers. And certainly, as to those people who are also taxpayers in the city, they have a special relationship. Why? Because ultimately, the city owns the utility. And in fact, your own lawyers agreed with that in 1980 when they put together a policy that said that property would be held, property that was acquired after the initial property was conveyed over to the Utilities Commission in the name of Utilities Commission, City of New Smyrna Beach, Florida. And the reasoning behind that was, well, since we're a part of the city, that means that we've complied with that part of the charter that says we're owned by the city. And I think that was probably a good solution for your bond issues, because certainly you can't be put in a position of having something happen to the property that you are using, the revenues of which are pledged to pay back the debt that's upon it. But you might be interested to know that other utilities like you have found different ways to deal with that little dichotomy, normally by providing the title is held jointly in the name of the Utilities Commission and the city. That didn't happen here. That's fine. I don't think it affects a blessed thing. But it is important that you understand that this utility was originally owned by the city, just like the utility in Orlando was done by a franchise purchase option in 1921, as many of them were. And that is how the title came in, because you used the power of the city when you set rates, when you exercise the municipal prerogative to serve within the city. So it's important to maintain that link. because it gives you certain powers, authorities, and yes, duties and obligations that are important to how you function. Being a municipal electric utility has been of significant benefit, not only to the commission, but to this community. I don't think there's any doubt about that. As a part of the city responsible for utilities, the commission exercises the municipal prerogative to serve within the city limits and the areas declared for service under Chapter 180. 180 is a 1935 statute that grants extraterritorial powers to cities. And the number of people, let alone lawyers, who understand the perplexities of that statute are very few indeed. But it is a benefit to entities that serve outside their city limits. So just recognize that that is a benefit to you. You are able to do that, and in some instances to the exclusion of others. Why is that important? Because the only real way to hold down rates in the long term is economies of scale. There is no economic question about that. And if you don't believe me, go ask Bushnell why they just spent 5 years acquiring a portion of poles and wires in their city from Seco. It's real simple. They didn't have any other way to grow. And if they can't grow, the dynamic of what the rates are set against never changes, ever. And when you're real small like Bushnell, that's a huge problem. This is why utilities attempt to grow their service areas. It's in order to keep prices down in the future. You have favorable municipal rate setting standards that apply through the case of Cooksey versus Utilities Commission, set in 1967. We talked about the policy for how you hold title. The tort law of sovereign immunity applies to the Utilities Commission in the same manner and applies to cities. That's a positive, not only for the commission, but for its ratepayers. Why? It keeps down the cost of liability. And finally, the Utilities Commission has been a municipal electric utility for purposes of issuing tax-exempt debt since 1978. So there are huge advantages to being, quote-unquote, part of the city. As I indicated before, you're not a nonprofit corporation. That is very clear from the statutes, that is very clear from the filings with the state of Florida, and it is good that you are not. Because in the context of your service area, you have superior powers to an electric cooperative, which is the only form of recognized nonprofit corporation that can provide electric service in the state of Florida. And that was formed under the Rural Electric Cooperative Act 1938. The powers of a city and its agencies are, in fact, more robust. Now, there are a certain set of criteria that I have had to live with in my life as not only a utility attorney, but a municipal utility attorney over almost 40 years. And one is that when you're not a city or a county and have home rule powers, you're in fact are a creature of special act, okay, which you are, then believe it or not, the old Judge Dillon from Iowa, 8th Circuit judge, but originally a doctor who was friends with General Grant, and asked Grant after the war if he'd make him a judge after he became a lawyer because he got tired of sawing off legs. That is the John Dillon who made Dillon's rule. He issued a number of opinions on local government law, and in his book, local governments had only those powers of self-government expressly granted or necessarily implied. That presumption is reversed with home rule power. You have all powers unless they're preempted or prohibited by the state legislature. And they have to be for a municipal purpose. That's what it says in our Constitution. So Dillon's rule applies. So you have to look to the language of the Charter Act for the criteria. You don't have home rule powers. You can't go out and fund a stadium, obviously. You can't go out and fund a developer road, obviously. You can't do those things. But can you become involved in an agreement that provides you with customers and facilities for which your advanced money is paid back over time? Yeah, you can do that. Doesn't mean you should do that every time. It depends upon the guarantees that back up that contract. But yes, you have the ability to do that. And in fact, you have done that. A utility, I don't know how else to say this, it's a business. I went and looked it up because, you know, I have always been interested in the governmental proprietary distinction under Florida law. Because when you sit as a utility and you set rates, well, you can't lock yourself in with rates. There's a whole bunch of cases in Florida that say that. Why? Because in your rate setting power, you're acting in a quasi-governmental, quasi-legislative capacity. But when I go look at the cases that talk about how you operate a utility and for what purpose, all of them, all 52 Florida Supreme Court cases, forget the U.S. Supreme Court cases that are out there too, say that it's in a proprietary capacity, that it's a business, that you can make that French word, profit. Yes, it is permitted. And in fact, this commission has taken the position in legal proceedings in 1988 that the 6% payment to the city is a profit. Doesn't mean you're obligated to pay a penny more. Although there is some implication there when it says any surplus would be paid over to the city. Doesn't mean that you have an absolute obligation to go out there and create a surplus. You have to act in accordance with your pre-existing financial commitments. You have to act in accordance with the best interest of the utility. But a utility is permitted to make a profit. And in fact, there's a 1981 5th District Court of Appeals case, you know, the appellate court that sits in Daytona Beach, that ruled that a 22% profit for the Orlando Utilities Commission that was paid over to the city of Orlando was not exorbitant and was in fact allowed. Why? Proprietary operation. There is no doubt in my mind, there is not a single lawyer who has practiced substantially in only the utilities area that will tell you differently. And I've just finished advising 3 different cities on this particular issue about proprietary powers. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Doesn't mean you go out and pass a 22% profit. God, why would you do that? You would have to look at the financial condition of your utility. Obviously, from tonight's discussion, you have a number of irons in the fire related to future facilities, for which I wish you all good fortune. That's a good thing. Why? Because it means there's future customers out there. Having those future customers is very important to a utility. Why? It helps you hold costs down. That's how they operate. You don't have to believe Tommy Cloud. This is the M1. You probably haven't seen this before. I had to live with this book when we represented Port St. Lucie in the 3-year saga with PepsiCo, where they tried to argue that, hey, the customer's always right and we're entitled to the lowest rates possible. That was their argument. Sound familiar? Didn't work. Didn't win. Why? Not only policies in the M1, but the articulated rules in Florida case law as to what are appropriate rate setting principles. And aside from those, you also have what I'd call a duty to serve. And there are a number of cases, I've quoted several of them. I was involved in the Winter Park case back in the late 80s when the rule was first articulated. And cities have a duty to serve within their service area. That is almost the prime directive for a utility, is the ability to serve its service area cost effectively. Yes, of course. It would never be in an uncost effective way or in a financially imprudent manner. But serve you must. And overall, you have a duty to set rates that accomplish the goals and policies of the utility while recovering costs from customer classes in approximate proportion to their cost-causing behavior, the zone of reasonableness. That's the rule. Now, I can get up here and say, God, that agreement, that's just developer friendly. That's a buzzword for I don't know what. It doesn't really articulate what the real problem is. Now, if you had a thought-through policy on extension, you might come up with an algorithm that said, if we got to pay X amount of money towards the extension of utilities, that doesn't work for us financially. And so adding customers at that point is actually losing us money. And several utilities have policies based upon those kinds of algorithms, those kinds of formulas. These are things that are within your ability to do. Doesn't mean you should do them, does mean you should consider them when you go to consider your overall cost of service for a utility. In rate setting in Florida, the standard is deferential. It's a quasi-legislative function. Perfection is not the standard. It is impossible to set rates that are in the abstract absolutely perfectly fair. Why? Because you can't set rates for an individual customer. You know, you might be able to argue, well, I shouldn't have to pay for that portion of the plant for 5 hours in a day because I don't really use this appliance or that appliance or whatever. You can't do that. It is administratively impossible to set rates on that basis. And so the courts have fashioned the standard that says you look at the allocation of costs among customer classes and you get as close as you can to equaling those. And the rates are validated unless there's a clear showing of discrimination or that you're just being plain arbitrary. And sometimes that happens. The Tropicana case is the best example I can think of. We represented Port St. Lucie for about 20 years. And PepsiCo built, they bought Tropicana. It's located over in Bradenton in Manatee County. They've been in the citrus business for, 70 or 80 years. Anthony Rossi originally created them. Neat company. You could always smell the fruit cooking when you went over the bridge there into Bradenton. And PepsiCo bought them out. And PepsiCo built what they called a knot from concentrate fruit juice plant in St. Lucie. And what they would do is they would keep fresh juice chilled at a very low temperature until they could process it and ship it and market it. And in order to keep it fresh, they have to chill it. Well, to chill it, they used millions of gallons of water that they would suck out of the Port St. Lucie system about 3 o'clock every afternoon. And it would depressurize a quarter of the water system in Port St. Lucie. And then they had the audacity to come in and say, hey, you know what, we're using so much water, we should be getting a discount. Well, you know, not all cases are perfect. Port St. Lucie had set up an economic development category for peaking plants, power plants that were locating down on 95 back when everybody thought, including, I might add, in New Smyrna Beach, that peaking plants were the answer to everything. They weren't. But, you know, I can understand it was not a foolish decision. It was the best decision people could make based on the knowledge that they had at the time. And so Port St. Lucie actually encouraged 3 of them to come down by offering them $1 a gallon for water. They never sold a drop of water. Why? The plant's never built. Why? Because of the Duke decision involving New Smyrna Beach that said you can only build a peaking plant for native load in Florida, which killed peaking plants, the merchant plants that were going to be built down here. A very unfortunate decision. It had some impacts for this utility. I think the utility has gotten past those impacts. But it was an inconvenient fact for us to try and deal with. And in fact, Port St. Lucie had a connection fee system that was set up to encourage connection. Why? They had a huge amount of septic tanks down there in a community that had a high water table. It's an environmental problem. They had, and every wastewater utility has an ability to look at that. You absolutely have an ability to look at that. Oh, in the short term, it may be cheaper to let people use septic tanks. But I think we all recognize that's not being a responsible steward of the groundwater supplies, is it? Because septic tanks don't treat the same way central wastewater treatment facilities do. So the city made a decision they were going to go out and create assessment districts, which they did. And today, 20 years later, they have some of the lowest rates in that part of Florida. Why? Because they added all those customers to the system. They also reduced the amount of solids in the shallow groundwater down there, amazingly enough. Why? Because they made a decision in the long-term best interest of the utility. Might not have been in the best short-term interest, but they did it using numbers and looking at it in a different way. We can all think that we have the answer to everything. I know I don't. I am constantly amazed at how many people around me are smarter than I am. And I would like to think in my lifetime that I have tried to find a way to work with people that were smarter than me. I certainly have with engineers. And the last thing I would share with you is the problem we had for a small city that was about to go bankrupt. And they didn't really know what to do. And I have a friend who does an optimization study. And he ran the optimization study and figured out that they had 2 plants and they only needed 1. And that they didn't really need to have a contract operator. I mean, he looked at a lot of different things that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with intelligent management of a utility. Very small scale. I mean, you guys dwarf that, okay? But the optimization study enabled the city commission to look at some different decisions. Short term, yeah, they had some high rates. You had people that were not happy campers, including people that lived outside the city limits. Long term, they haven't increased the rates in 10 years. Wow, unreal. Why? Because in the plans that were put together to look at that, those plans accounted for virtually every cost that might come up. And by implementing those parameters, it increased the number of customers that connected to the city, which enabled them to collect the impact fees as well as the additional revenues from those new customers. So all I'm trying to point out to you is not what is the right answer. It's that you have flexibility there as long as you stay within the parameters I've outlined. And yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. And you know, if I hear anything that's, you know, worthy of a rejoinder, I reserve that.
Mr. Davenport? Oh, I'm sorry, wait a minute. Bernadette, since you're running the deal, I'll shut my mouth. Go ahead.
Mr. Davenport?
I'm going to hold my comments for a few minutes, if I may. I'm going to think a little bit more.
So, well, our issue was, you know, I guess what we run into is growth, no growth. You know, non-for-profit, running like a business. And you know, what I've understood from the opinion was that, you know, we didn't have the ability to, or the flexibility to engage obviously the different projects that were out there. I've always believed that, you know, you grow the business, to your point, to the scale, that there's benefits to be, that the ratepayer benefits. I was always perplexed that I could never qualify, you know, benefiting every ratepayer exactly the same. That message to me just didn't make sense, that I had to, you know, because I went as simple as asset management. If I bought a truck that was always going to be on the east side of town, how was the guy on the west side of the town benefiting from the assets? So that logic didn't work for me. The non-for-profit part is, if we're going to grow, if we're going to build Mr. Hoover's water plants, and we're going to develop all this, we have to do it with revenue. And you have to, if you can borrow it, but you still got to pay for it. And it's just, I didn't understand what the resistance was of growth that's coming as far as embracing it, not funding it, but embracing it. Because when the growth is done, to your point, we do receive impact fees. We do receive revenues. And every time you do a rate study, if you do increase or decrease or whatever that you choose, the more rates you have, probably the less it's going to be that you would have to raise everybody else's rates. So the benefit of having more participants would then lessen the burden on the existing participants. and for me, I don't understand why we would, that's a bad thing. And again, so it's understanding that, A, we have the flexibility to do that based on the merits and the criteria, does it meet these standards? That was where we were at. And again, I don't know what it could be just as straight up as philosophy and policy. This is how I see it. This is how I want to run it, versus option B, which is a new CEO that comes in and says, I don't mean to say that in a negative way, just a different philosophy. I'm sure people in my business, people run their different businesses differently than I do, and they have success with it. So it doesn't determine, because you do it differently, a negative result. But it doesn't also qualify as the negative result. So that's to grow, we have a lot of growth coming. I listen to our staff. I severely think our staff, we're understaffed. Now, it's just sitting here absorbing, listening, approving. I want to give our staff the best assets to work with. I want to give our staff the right amount of people so that they don't go to work and just get ground up, and in the process, they can actually come have a productive, positive day. Those are things that are always been my concerns, giving the utilities body, the business of the utilities, the right resources to really be the best utilities for the entire community. So those are the things that I've struggled with. And again, it's not as simple as that, but like I said, the growth obviously lessens the burden of, if you do it properly, if you ever have to raise rates, it should lessen the burden of the people prior to the expansion. So that's kind of the issue with the city. And again, anybody that knows me, the last thing I want to ever do in my life is give the city any more, the government anything more to control or do, because frankly, they that's a whole nother subject. But I want us as a body to be able to look at investment when it makes sense, grow responsibly, make good decisions, versus just at every thing it's kind of like, no, we don't do it that way. We don't look at it. And I'm sure, and Mr. Cloud, I appreciate when we sat down, you said, hang on a second here, we had the telecommunications nightmare. There's probably a little bit of reservations and people being protective a little more than they should because of the wounds from that investment. And I get that. That made sense to me when you said that. But it can't completely cripple you, shut you down, and close your doors from being open-minded to possibly new things. So that's what I got from the opinion. I hope that moving forward, when the Utilities Commission has the ability to work within the community as a partner, whether it be the county, the city, the ratepayer, wherever, who would have, we're open to it. In that like I said, I look at these investments as good investments. And I look at growing this to giving the resources and assets to the business of the utilities body to make it the best it possibly can. And that's the only way you do that is you feed it. And the only way you're going to feed it is you got to create more revenue, or you raise the rates. I'd rather create more revenue than raise rates. That's my 2 cents.
Mr. Biedenbach?
Yeah. Did I hear you correctly in saying that, excuse me, that we could make a different impact fee to try to bring online people that are on the septic system? Instead of saying, hey, our impact fee or our fees are $1,300 or $1,500 plus the flow fee is whatever another, instead of it being 3, as long as we don't go below the cost of providing that service, we could make that thing anywhere we wanted to be to encourage the elimination of septic tanks. Is that what I heard?
Not anything you want it to be. Can you take into account in how you collect the fee over time? Yes. Can you set a fee? I mean, you've got to try and not be discriminatory in those who have an equal amount of capacity that's being used. But what I've seen used in other communities, such as Palm Bay, just down the interstate, is an installment program, or a program where certain smaller costs are picked up. Before you can make a decision on whether or not that makes sense to do here in New Smyrna Beach, you need to have a cost of service study, see if that is financially prudent. But yes, you do have the flexibility to make that kind of a decision with the proper information.
What you're telling me is figure out what my costs of doing business are first, and I do that by having a study.
Yeah.
After I have the study and it says X is what my cost is, then I can be anywhere down to that X, and I can spread it across any way that I want, that we want to.
As long as it is rational and not arbitrary, and as long as it is not discriminatory, yes, you can. What you will find out from a true expert rate consultant, who would be the one doing that, not me, because I'm not a rate consultant, okay? I'm not an engineer, I'm not an appraiser, I'm just a lawyer. You know, I try and leave that to the people that are expert at it, who know what they're doing. But I've seen in many rate studies an indication from the rate consultant that, well, if you apply this policy here, you may, for example, increase the percentage of commercial customers you have on the system, which is great news for residents. Why? Because the commercial customers, percentage-wise, end up paying typically a higher percentage of costs. They tend to be better customers. I know you guys don't like to hear that from the standpoint of your businesses, but I actually represent a small community now that has virtually no commercial customers with their electric system, Fort Meade, and it's killing them. Because the margins on commercial customers are better. It's just the way it works. When we sat down with Jacob Williams, the guy who's in charge of FMPA, you know Jacob, you know, he was willing to recognize some accommodations in the all requirements contract, which we just negotiated last night, based upon the fact that we had not experienced the kind of commercial growth that we wished we had. And so, depending upon if you have ways of helping to grow that, like you have property that might be capable of supporting commercial customers, then that, you know, that might also enter into your considerations of planning. Because if you get a lot more customers like that, it's better for your overall business. It can be.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Cloud, nice job. I thought that was very well presented, learned a lot, and I was very glad to hear you talk about we need to be thinking about this as running our own business, not just a utilities commission that we are involved in the utility business. That was a good signal. I also felt that you explained very, very well some designed-in flexibilities we have. And I'm the guy that talks about staying in the lanes. So once you got a designed-in flexibility, and then I feel real good about going where I have to go as long as I've got the credibility and integrity to back it up. I was also glad to hear about the city backs us up in the progression here. And is that for bond covenants as well?
No, it is not.
Okay.
There is express language on that in
Right.
the charter.
That's what I thought. So even though the city's a AA rating, we still have our own rating and still have to cover everything, all covenants with our bond council.
That's true, but for example,
Yes, go
in
ahead.
using their ability to levy assessments,
Yes.
which is collected on the tax
Yeah,
bill,
that's my next comment. Exactly. Go.
that's
Keep going.
that's the kind of support
Yeah.
that can be beneficial to
Right.
the Utilities Commission.
I think about all of our growth, as Commissioner Holcomb has continued to stress, and right on, is we've got to be thinking about our financial plan to support that, which may mean go to the debt markets while rates are low. The bond market is probably be worth considering taking a look at once we get into our big, huge plans. and the right, and then switching off on individual projects like we endured on State Road 44 and the sewer system. We, actually, I think back on that now, that we made a good move, and obviously we had the flexibility to support it by providing a loan and letting the city do the assessment, the power to do the assessment, which would help us further down the road with respect to sewer. I think this cost of service study, we need to jump on pretty quickly. Was it 2006, you said, was the last one we had?
Now, maybe there was one
Maybe
done
there's
with the
some- I don't remember.
2012
Mr. Preston? do you
rate
remember?
study, but I couldn't.
There was one in 2012?
It was part of a water rate study, I believe.
Water rate, that's right, when we
And
raised the
sewer
water
rates.
rates, 2012, yeah.
But there was not an electric rate cost.
No, that was just water.
Okay.
But good exercise here tonight with respect to having the chance to have you address all of us so we all can hear each other as well as feed off each other. And that's why I think it's important to be able to have you come in and do this and other similar type programs going on down the road.
Mr. Davenport, are you ready to say anything?
I've really appreciate your report. It's very, very, very informative to me. As Mr. Holcomb said earlier, you don't know whether who you're supposed to talk to or not talk to, or what you're supposed to do or not, what you're not supposed to do. And it's like, all of a sudden, you're sitting up here and supposed to, and loving this community and doing the right things for the community and giving your time. And you're going, what am I doing? This is kind of scary, almost intimidation a couple of times to me personally. I just wish, that we would get more, how do I say this? I wish when we're getting advice from our attorney, and speak to Mr. Preston, I wish we could get as much to the point as we could and be on, let's all work together. And it's just like you said there, Mr. Griffin, we know that it's not a sin to make a profit here. I mean, we need to be thinking about that. We need to be thinking about expansion. And that's why I'm so happy to hear this whole report and to have read it. And read it 3 times. You got to read it several times, take it all in. And it takes a good while. But I just appreciate you, and I would like to see a cost of services. Mr. Griffin, I'd like to back you up on all of us. I think that's something that's come out tonight.
Yeah, especially utilities.
Yeah, and utility, electricity, excuse me.
I mean electricity, of course. Thanks.
Anyway, I just appreciate you. It's been real interesting.
Could I make a comment? Okay. I really appreciate your report. It's really helped clarify some things for me. But I'm going to get more basic here, back to why we called you in to begin with. And I know from my perspective, the reason that we did is because I was very frustrated with the advice that we were getting from our attorney, Mr. Preston. I did not feel that the advice that he was giving us, it seemed to me that it was much more his own personal philosophy than a matter of law. And in the report that you gave us on page 2, you talk about a memo where you go through various things here. That the Utilities Commission has a statutorily delegated fiduciary responsibility to make decisions in the long-term best interest of the utility and its ratepayers, and will not offer service or incentive to anyone at the cost of another. That the Utilities Commission is a not-for-profit corporation that risks losing its tax-free status and its bonds ratings if it produces a profit. That the Utilities Commission is a public utility under Section 36603, and every commission policy decision affects rate base, thus there are no free services. There are 12 of these statements, and if my memory is serving me correctly, these were all put in writing by our attorney. And in a very nice way, you showed through matters of law, very specifically, how these things that our attorney told us were in fact not correct.
Well, can I say something?
Yes.
My job, I think, was to focus on a positive approach to expenditures. And, you know, statements, you can look at it in the abstract. There's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with certain philosophies and adopting those philosophies. But philosophies are not law. You may recall we had a state statute that put planning, turned planning into a law, and every planner I ever met said that was the worst thing they ever did. Lawyers think otherwise, but they actually did away with it in 2011. Not sure that was a good idea. But
Mr. Clem,
all I wanted to
may I
do was
interrupt
point
you?
out what the flexibility was you had. I have no interest in commenting on other things, other than to say, here's what the law says. That's it.
And that's what we wanted, and that's what we need. And in my opinion, that is not what we have been getting.
Well, I haven't rendered an opinion on that,
I
just
know.
so you know.
I know.
And generally speaking, the overall conclusion at the end of that memo, I don't find fault with. The overall conclusion that you have to be consistent with your bond covenants.
Sure.
And you can't do something that's not a public purpose. I take a little issue with calling the commission a nonprofit corporation. I can understand how someone may feel. I have felt at times when I've stood in front of elected boards and in fact the Public Service Commission, and I know that they're not really taking care of customer concerns, like screaming out, well, you should be operated like. And I stopped myself because I realized that that's, in law, that is not the case. You are not a nonprofit corporation. There is an argument out there, I'm not making it, but it's out there that you actually have a duty to make some kind of profit, at least to the extent of 6%. That is not my job. And this commission has policies that you have set in the past, and I'm not suggesting that you throw any of them out until they've been studied carefully. All I wanted to do is provide you with some guidelines. There is some flexibility in there. There is a left, a right, and a center lane, to be sure. And the picking the right lane depends upon what kind of financial and engineering advice you receive, not necessarily the legal advice.
That's kind of where the interweaving of a legal opinion and a business or policy opinion. And what I said is I need a firewall between the two. I need a legal opinion, and I spoke to this earlier. I said in a meeting like a year ago, I need a legal opinion to what my concern is. I welcome your policy, opinion, whatever, but I need it separate of the legal opinion. I'm not saying that tonight. I said that a year ago. And that's where I think it's so interwoven, and my concerns are that, to your point, and I understand there's a lot more knowledge that you all have probably than we do sitting here in our modest 2 years of experience and 24 agendas. I get that. I understand that. But here's your legal opinion. This is why I would advise you against it, for it. This is what I would do. This is why I think it's different. But the two have to be separate. Legal needs to stand as legal, and then policy needs to stand over here. They need to be discussed separately. And that's where, Mr. Mitchum, I had a conversation with you, I don't know, 2 months ago. And I said, my biggest concern here is the separation of those two. And it's what it is. I mean, like I said, I don't have a problem with 16 years of experience to give me what you've seen in the history and what you've done here. But you got to give me what I'm asking for, and I'm not feeling that I get that because you're worried that I won't listen to you on the policy side or what your reasoning is. It's not you believe strongly in what you believe in, and I 100% agree with that. But I'm not asking for that exclusive. I'm asking for that legal opinion, and that's my struggle. That's, and again, I don't know how to handle it. I have a concern of, are you working with me, against me, or around me? And as counsel, I would hope you would want me to have 100% confidence in what you give me. I can take and make good decisions for our ratepayers and our citizens of this community. That's my struggles. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say. I think it's important that you answer these things, or you give us what your beliefs are, and I welcome that. So that's what I've got.
Mr. Preston?
I'll keep my comments to just a few. And Mr. Cloud, thank you. Your experience, background, those with whom you walk, cases you try are very impressive. And your report was very impressive. Obviously, as was your presentation. There are some differences that I, who do not have that experience, do not have that, my head has not been in the utilities business for 40 years. And I recognize that and know that. But there are some distinctive differences that I have with some of your foundations upon which you reach your conclusions. Your conclusions and the summary of conclusions you presented tonight, which eliminated the back half of the conclusions you had in your report, I can live with, I agree with, and I appreciate. But I think that there are some significant statements made within your report, whether it be regarding the identification of the Utilities Commission as owned by the city, or even an agency representative of the city. I think there are issues regarding the autonomy upon which you based some of your conclusions, which are subject to debate. I don't have that 40 years experience. I recognize that. 10 years ago, we had someone else who had that experience and that depth of knowledge render us an opinion from Holland and Knight, and you know Clay Henderson as well as I do. Clay rendered us an opinion that I just handed out to our commission, which differs in some significant areas than yours. And so my comments tonight are to my commission, and I will address your comments about me and my representation of you in a minute, but I want to keep that separate from this event. And my comments to my commission is that without my opinion at all, you have two distinct, differing opinions. The conclusions that Mr. Cloud submitted to you, I don't think you will find much difference in the conclusions regarding the flexibilities you may have and the determinations of the decisions and the policies you make will differ much from Mr. Henderson, myself, or Mr. Cloud. And I think as Mr. Cloud said in my memorandum to you, he didn't disagree. As a matter of fact, he agreed with the conclusion of my memorandum. He didn't agree with some of the statements leading up to it. And foundations laid, such as foundations laid in his report, are subject to discussion and further understanding. There may be errors in foundations laid, but the ultimate determination as to the recommendations are what are essential. That's what's critical. And so I respect what was done, but basically I respect the conclusions that were made here, and I only challenge my commission that if we continue forward and make decisions regarding policy of expenditures particularly, that we do so with discussion of, and not just blind acceptance of, statements made by any one of the three. And I agree with you, Mr. Holcomb, the gaining of that knowledge and research provides a better foundation and a broader foundation on which you can make those decisions. So I respect that. So I don't want to go into particular detail, and I do appreciate you and what you presented and offered to us. I don't necessarily agree with every statement that you made in your report.
And I would just want to say, I agree with you that don't rely just on one person when you do make a policy decision. I agree with you there, that, I mean, I've known Clay. I'm not sure, Clay would characterize himself as a utility lawyer. There was a little 8-year sojourn on the county council. And we'll leave it at that. But yeah, I agree, you shouldn't rely on just one person. I think I've stated that.
And just to move from that a bit and just to briefly touch on your concerns, which I do appreciate. And I want you to know the sincerity of the appreciation that you want the identification of the left-hand side of the road. You don't want me to tell you anywhere in the middle. And I do appreciate that, in the fact that that is your legal box or parameter. Whether it's my interpretation, which I don't believe, or the fact that it isn't remembered, you hired me to do more than that. You hired me to talk to you in the middle of the road. And so my response to that is that's where I have been, in seeking to bring not just the legal parameter, but also not what just could be done, but what should be done. And I understand and hear now, I mean, there have been a lot of commissions, but right now this commission is saying they don't want it. You don't want it. You want, give me the legal parameter, and I'll determine what we should do. You tell me what I could do, I'll determine what we should do. And that is different than what I have been and who I have been for this commission since when. So that might provide a broader understanding as to my basis here in representing you. So, and I don't, and you may, and I will, but I don't think now is the proper time to get into much debate about it. We can have a one-on-one or a meeting or a workshop.
Well, and again, I appreciate that. And like I said, this is the first time we've had that conversation. I'm not gonna go pull your contract and look what your contract was when I became the commissioner. I was trying to figure out what my job was as a commissioner, let alone what your contract was. I've tried to express that to you, and that's there is some historical, I mean, you have the historical data, you've been here. But again, for me, and again, all I'm telling you, Mr. Preston, is that I just wish, and Mr. Mitchell too, this isn't exclusive to council. I didn't come here with any preconceived agenda. I came here with a duty to serve and took my oath pretty serious. But if I'm not given all the information or all the resources to make the very best decision, it's frustrating. We've had these conversations privately. One of the things through the interview process that I want to articulate to who the new CEO is, how important that is as a commissioner to feel as part of the process versus the outside looking in. It's tough, and that's where we sit. That's how you always to tell people how I feel is how I feel. It's a result of how I feel I've been treated, and that's how I feel. Doesn't mean that you're a bad guy, doesn't mean you're a bad guy, it just means that's how I feel and things can be fixed. But I'm just telling you, I've got some big decisions to make. Thank God I'm only one of 5 people. I need the very best, and I sit here and I talk about it. I said a year ago, boy, it seems like we have a lot of senior management getting ready to leave. CEO gone, auditors are going to be gone. Miguel and Electric is gone. We have all these people that are leaving. That's hard for a business to just absorb all of your senior management walking out the door. So to Ms. Parker, understanding that we just figured this out, this epiphany, and I appreciated the timeline that you gave us within a couple of days, Mr. Belinsky. All these things, when you start to layer them, we start to separate, staff over here, commission over here. I just don't think it's beneficial to who we all represent. And it needed to be said. It's said, and like I said, I've got to feel a lot better about the advice I'm getting and the trust and the ability of going to get it. So that's, like I said, that's where I stand tonight, and that's all I've got for tonight, and I'm done for tonight. So you guys take the rest of it.
I don't feel comfortable.
Okay.
You know, I do not feel comfortable with the advice that Mr. Preston gives us. I appreciate his 16 years of service. I've been on the commission now about a year and a half. I've listened repeatedly to giving advice that I felt was not, hearing advice I felt was not correct. I think there has been a lack of cooperation with the city, to the point that I think that the former attorney at the city and Mr. Preston disliked each other to the point of ridiculousness, and the correspondence between the two was pretty, just flat out nasty, not at all professional. I think that it's very important. We have a lot of important decisions to make moving forward. And I think it's time for a change. So, you know, I'm going to go out on a limb here. So, you know, I'm paid a whole $100 a meeting here to do this, but I think it's time for us to part company. And I would like to see us terminate our contract with Mr. Preston. So I'm going to make that as a motion.
So that's a suggestion, formal suggestion of my resignation?
That's a formal motion.
That's a formal suggestion of my resignation?
Sure.
I will take it as such.
But it's a motion that I want, I don't know, you know, you could resign or we could fire you. But it's a formal motion for us to part company. And I understand the ramifications of that. I understand that we have a contract that I was not a party to. I didn't do it. You are being paid, I believe, $12,000 a month. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Plus you are paid separately for any type of litigation. Is that correct?
That is not correct.
If you represent us in any litigation, you're not paid separately for that?
No,
Okay, so you pay $12,000 a month.
period.
And if we terminate your contract, you get 5 months severance.
It's 20 weeks severance.
20 weeks.
So what's the dollar amount?
I don't know.
It's about, well, 20 weeks is, 20 weeks is what, 5 months? No.
$60,000 there, Bob?
Yes, it's gonna be you're gonna write a check for $60,000 unless, and I forget what the whole contract said, but there was something in there about malfeasance and something else, and I don't know whether it was anything else in there, but otherwise it's gonna be $60,000.
Well, and you know, I don't want to go there.
No, okay, excuse me. There has been a motion made. Is there a second?
What did Mr. Preston just say? You just asked, is that my resignation or what?
He asked if it was the form, he asked what my motion was. He asked what I was doing. And I basically made a motion to terminate his relationship with the Utilities Commission.
Which I hereby resign.
You just resigned?
Do you just resign?
I resign.
We accept your resignation. Any other business tonight?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
You have under 8B, I believe it is. Put my glasses on there. Number 2.
Hang on a minute, let me get my paperwork straightened out here.
payment approval for invoice services.
No, we did that
We did that first.
while you were out. Yes,
Thank you.
Well, we'll have another, something that we have to address,
I'm sure.
is that
For
we need an
tonight.
attorney.
Yep. We need to talk about an interim attorney. Now, and I think we need to do this tonight. I happen to think about this, and I don't know of anybody in town that is qualified for utilities. And so I would suggest that we hire Mr. Cloud for 2 or 3 months to hold our hand and get through this time until we can get an RFP out and get some people to bid on the job. But that's my opinion. And I'm willing to listen to anybody that has anything to say about it.
I think Mr. Griffin needs to be brought up to speed. Mr. Griffin was out when this.
Sorry, I had to take a bio break.
Okay?
Preston resigned.
Yes,
Mr.
I-
Preston resigned.
Yes,
Okay, I
I
didn't-
was here when you said that.
Oh,
I
okay.
didn't know.
Okay, so, was that a motion?
No, I can't make a motion. I'm the chair. Somebody else has.
Is that actually in our jobs that says you can?
Well,
I'm just
in the
curious.
Roberts Rules of Order, and I'm just not
Which we're not
interested in
following.
challenge.
Okay.
I'm not interested
Okay,
in
I'll
challenge.
make your motion.
Okay, it's been moved. Can I get a second?
What was we didn't identify a timeline, we didn't.
2 months,
Okay.
You said 2 to 3 months.
2 to 3 months.
That's not a timeline. Is it 2 or is it 3?
Yeah.
3.
3, okay,
okay.
3 months. We need to set a price not to exceed, which I have no idea about this. Can we hang 12,
Is I'm going to ask him?
I was going to say,
I mean,
Mr.
is
Cloud,
that
can
even-
we hang a $12,000?
Are you even willing to do this?
Are you willing to do this?
You know, the first thing I want to say is, that was a class act, what he did. I want to say that for the record. That was a class act, what he did, and that's very impressive. There aren't many lawyers who would have done what he did. So while you may have had disagreements with advice you received, I want to share that with you. I've been practicing 40 years, and I've rarely seen such a class act as what took place right there. So having said that, yes, I would be willing to do it. You want me to do it for $12,000 a month, as long as the United States doesn't come down and sue you. I mean, until you can figure out, I mean, I'm willing to do it, until you can figure out what you want to do on a permanent basis.
Well, obviously, the standard procedure would be, we'd have to put out the RFP for new legal counsel, correct? Mr. Mitchum?
I believe so.
Well, I don't believe he was actually selected by RFP, and there is no state law requiring it. But the flexibility exists for you to do an RFP for your general counsel. So you can do it. You're not required to do it, but you can do it.
Okay.
And you should consider it and not make a decision tonight.
No,
Okay,
right, that's the part with the 90 days.
Okay, let me ask a question. Is there any problem with hiring you like this from the board for 3 months to fill us in an emergency situation?
No, there's no problem.
Okay, so your motion to hire the man, do we have a second?
No second.
Jack has seconded. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Commissioner Brett Parker,
Yes.
Commissioner Davenport,
Yes.
Commissioner Griffith,
Yes.
Commissioner Holcomb,
Yes.
Chairman Beanball.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Who, what, why, or where does he get in contact to do what needs to be done for starting tomorrow morning? He needs to get a hold of you. Would you two please get with each other before we get out of here? Is there any other business before the board tonight? Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Debbie, do you have anything for us to sign for tonight?
Oh, probably.
You guys all have my number. I'll be the easiest guy you ever had to get in touch with. And if you get tired of me, I'll be the easiest guy.